Story 1.
I nearly lost $900,000 during my divorce, but instead, I destroyed my cheating wife in court with shocking evidence. I work as an elementary school teacher, so my daily routine is very predictable. I have fixed hours at school, and every Tuesday we usually had staff meetings that ended around 6 p.m. That meant I normally got home by 7. My wife, Terry, whom I had been married to for over 30 years, would go to the gym every Tuesday evening. She always came back exhausted, so I usually prepared dinner while she showered and handled the house chores. But one day, my principal surprised us by canceling the meeting. It was only 3:30 p.m., and I thought it would be a great idea to head home early, cook dinner, and maybe catch up on some household tasks. Lately, I'd noticed Terry becoming more distant, and I hoped a candle at dinner might help rekindle some spark between us. Our marriage had been strained by financial troubles, and I could feel her pulling away more and more. She wanted to control everything, and if things didn't go her way, she would become stubborn and irritable. I always thought of myself as patient, but it was starting to wear me down. When I got home, I noticed her car in the garage. That was strange, because she usually took the bus to the gym. I slipped in quietly through the back door. The first thing I saw was her purse sitting on the kitchen counter. Terry was always meticulous about where she placed her things, so this was odd. Then I noticed her workout clothes and a large towel on the floor. Just as confusion set in, I heard noises coming from upstairs. My first thought was that she might not be feeling well, so I cautiously started up the stairs. That's when I stumbled over a pair of men's shoes. Scattered on the steps were pants, a shirt, socks, and worst of all, Terry's lingerie, the kind she only wore for anniversaries or special nights. My blood ran cold. I froze on the stairs, heart pounding, stomach turning. For a moment, I thought I might faint. I sat down, trembling. Then anger began to boil inside me, an emotion I rarely allowed to take control. Years of teaching had given me patience, but this was beyond anything I could manage. I moved quietly toward the bedroom. To reach it, you had to pass through the walk-in closet. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. And there it was, my wife, my partner of 3 decades, the mother of our children, betraying me in our own bed. I pulled out my phone and hit record. I knew I would need proof, not just for myself, but for the storm that was about to follow. Watching it unfold before my eyes was like living through a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Terry, the woman who claimed to love me, who volunteered at charities, who acted like the perfect wife, was now just another liar. I couldn't watch anymore. I stopped recording, slipped out of the house, and just walked aimlessly. Eventually, I ended up in a park miles away. I sat on a bench, splashed some water on my face, and played the video back. The sound was low, so nearby kids wouldn't hear, but on that screen was the collapse of my marriage, my family, my entire life. And there in the park, I broke down and cried. By the time I got back home, it was around 7 p.m., my usual return time on meeting days. Terry greeted me at the back door with fake concern. "Do you want me to get you something to drink?" Her eyes were full of feigned worry, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. My voice shook as I muttered, "Not really. I think it's just my stomach. I'm going to take a shower and sleep it off." "All right, but take a bucket in case you throw up. I don't want to ruin the clean sheets," she said casually. That almost broke me. Those clean sheets had already been ruined, stained by betrayal. I replied more firmly, "I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." And that's exactly what I did.
For the next few days, I pretended to be unwell. She went on with life as if nothing had happened, while I carried the weight of the recording in my pocket. The evidence that my marriage was nothing but ashes. When Monday came, I finally decided what to do next. I needed answers. Was this just a one-time betrayal, or had it been going on for a while? The next morning, I told the principal that I had to undergo an unexpected medical procedure and wouldn't be able to teach for a few days. A substitute was arranged, which gave me the freedom I needed. On Tuesday, I left home as usual, but parked several streets away, then walked back quietly, cutting through neighbors' yards. I knew all the back routes and moved carefully so no one would notice me. I slipped into our detached garage and changed into casual clothes and soft shoes to keep silent. Then came the waiting. I remembered that the last time I'd come home early, there hadn't been any strange cars parked outside. That meant her lover probably came on foot. I crouched behind the hedge and bushes near our front entrance, hidden but with a clear view of the door. Terry carried on her morning as if everything was normal. Washing dishes, starting the dishwasher, vacuuming, dusting. Around 11:30, she went upstairs. I heard the shower running, followed by the toilet flushing. After about 45 minutes, she came back down and left the front door slightly open, an unspoken invitation for her guest. It didn't take long. Around 12:30, he showed up. I didn't know who he was at first, but I managed to capture about 10 seconds of video on my phone. It showed his side profile and almost a clear shot of his face. He didn't hesitate, he just walked straight into my house. The first words I heard froze me in place. "I hope you're wearing that workout outfit again." "Of course," Terry replied with a giggle. "You always loved when I put it on. Sometimes I think that's what hooked you in the first place." That was all I needed. Their comfort with each other screamed of a long-term affair. They headed upstairs without a care in the world. I returned to the garage, my heart pounding out of my chest. My head was spinning with questions. Who was this man? How long had this been going on? And why hadn't she ever talked to me about anything? What terrified me more was the thought of my health. They hadn't used protection, at least not that I could see. The idea that she might have put me at risk made my stomach churn. I thought back to her years at the gym, the social circle of married women she had joined, and the charity events. Maybe the gym held the answers.
Update 1. Being a teacher came with one big advantage. I had access to printers and other resources. I decided to start by printing still frames from the video I'd taken. Identifying him was now my top priority. On Thursday, when Terry was supposed to go to the gym again, I suggested going with her. I claimed I was thinking about getting a membership myself, especially since school was on break. She immediately grew uncomfortable and tried to talk me out of it. "It's really just a group of wives who chat more than work out," she insisted, but I didn't budge. So that Thursday, I walked into the gym with her. The moment I stepped inside, it felt like a scene from an old Western. Everyone turned to stare at me, whispering among themselves. Terry was visibly on edge, sneaking nervous glances toward the staff area. I tried to distract myself by walking around the facility. It was the usual setup, rows of machines, mirrors on the walls. Near the exit, I noticed a staff board with photos and contact info. At the top was the owner and director, Miss Elizabeth West, followed by 2 women and 1 man. My blood went cold. The man was him, the lover. Under his photo, Philip Barnes, head of training programs, personal coach. As I memorized his number, I looked back toward the machines. Terry was gone. Panic struck me until I spotted her a few minutes later in a hushed but desperate conversation with none other than Philip. She stood partly hidden behind weight equipment, gesturing for him to leave. Then she quickly returned to her machine as if nothing had happened. She didn't realize I'd seen it all. I sat there burning with rage, trying to keep my composure. When she came back over, she noticed my pale face and asked softly, "Are you okay? Is your blood sugar still low?" "I'm fine now. Are you ready to leave?" Before she could answer, the director's voice echoed through the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, the last training session of the day is canceled. Mr. Barnes suddenly felt unwell and had to go home." A wave of disappointment swept through the women in the gym. But I wasn't disappointed. For me, it only confirmed everything. Update 2. It seemed that workouts with Mr. Bonte were a cornerstone for many women at that gym. That alone made me think this needed deeper investigation. When I glanced at Terry, she didn't show much reaction to the announcement of his sudden illness. But I could swear I saw her shoulders relax, as if a huge weight had been lifted. "Let's go," she said quickly, snatching her towel and gym bag from the storage area where everyone left their things during class. We were just stepping out when a woman approached us, someone I didn't immediately recognize. "Hello," she said nervously. "Sorry, I'm new to all this and lost track of time. My son Timothy's here, right?" That wasn't usual. New parents often struggled with pickup procedures. I reassured her I'd get Timothy while colleagues covered the remaining kids. I found him near his classroom, chatting with another student. "Hey Tim, your mom's here. Let's head to the pickup area." He looked puzzled. He was in the last year of elementary school, old enough to not lose track of time. "That's weird," he muttered. "Mom's usually busy with her fitness instructor on Friday afternoons. Back at my old school, she often didn't come until 5:30. The word fitness instructor hit me like a hammer. My heart pounded as I casually asked, "Oh, that's great she takes care of her health. Do you happen to know his name?" "Yeah, it's Bonte or something like that. He works at the local gym but also does private lessons at home. That's who I want to be when I grow up. Mom always seems so happy and relaxed after training with him. We usually order takeout on Fridays because she doesn't have time to cook." I nearly lost my composure. This man wasn't just entangled with my wife, he was messing around with multiple women in town. Back at the car, his mother thanked me warmly for helping. "Not a problem," I said smoothly, "part of the job. By the way, I don't think we've officially met. I'm Gerard D. Kids just call me Mr. D." "Nice to meet you," she replied, shaking my hand. "I'm Mary Jones. I remember seeing you at the gym last Thursday. You were there with your wife, Terry. Sorry she seemed in such a hurry to leave. It looked like Mr. Bonte's absence threw everything off." The moment she said his name, her entire demeanor shifted. She paled, her hands trembled, and she stammered, Well, Mr. D, see you later," before practically fleeing the parking lot. That sealed it. Bonte wasn't just a trainer. He was a serial predator in our community.
Update 3. It was time to think about my future, and in that vision there was no Terry. Rage gave me clarity. I began reviewing all the small but crucial details of our shared life, the sort of things couples often overlook. Who pays which bills? Which insurance company do we use? When are utilities due? From which account do we make automatic payments? I discovered the mortgage had only a small balance left. My retirement account had grown to an impressive $900,000, thanks to mandatory contributions from our teachers' union. Our savings account, intended for an overseas vacation, held about $30,000. That trip was no longer on the table. My priority became draining it before Terry realized I knew about her betrayal. Quietly, I engineered a series of appliance breakdowns while she wasn't home. I'd unplug a cord, then claim a repairman had come to fix it, paying in cash. In reality, I pocketed the money and repaired it myself. Over time, I gathered nearly $20,000 this way. I also purchased tools and other necessities to prepare for what was coming. Update 4. I always paid cash for everything, showing the receipts to Terry, then secretly returning the items the next day. Dishonest? Absolutely. But honesty and trust had already been gutted from our marriage. Because of her actions,
I was becoming a man I never thought I could be, a liar. Her Thursday daytime workouts with Bonte continued, and I no longer bothered even trying to initiate anything intimate with her. We coexisted like roommates. That was it. Quietly, I began boxing up my personal belongings, keeping them stored in the garage where Terry rarely went. Since her car usually sat outside, the garage was basically my territory, and she didn't notice my gradual disappearance. On the rare occasion she did ask about missing items, I told her they'd broken or that I didn't need them anymore. She accepted those answers mostly because many of my things didn't fit her preferred aesthetic anyway. When most of my possessions were gone and the house looked practically unchanged, I realized how much I had already surrendered to Terry's control over the years. I withdrew what I could from my retirement account and bought a small house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny yard, and a garage, but it was mine. Close to the school where I worked, and best of all, the mortgage was small enough that half my salary easily covered the payments. No mansion, no luxury, but solid. Amazing what you can find if you're willing to skip the glossy neighborhoods. I moved my belongings in piece by piece. Furniture wasn't a problem. Secondhand shops and donation centers were full of cheap finds. Honestly, the place reflected my own state. Used, but still standing. It was time for everyone to get what they deserved. One afternoon at school pickup, Mary Jones came over to me again. Her son Timothy was playing nearby, but I immediately noticed she looked shaken, as if she had been crying. As a teacher, you get trained to read those signs. "Mr. D, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked, her voice wavering. "Of course. Just park over there and meet me at the benches." I always joked that those benches near the pickup zone were my office. She parked, then joined me, while Timothy kicked a ball around. She hesitated, then finally began. "I don't know how much you know about what's been happening at the gym." I kept my face steady. "I know Terry, my wife, enjoys it there. Says it keeps her in shape." She bit her lip, clearly wrestling with herself, then blurted, "There are things you need to know." I cut to the chase. "Does this have to do with Philip Bonte?" Her expression hardened instantly. "You have no idea just how much it has to do with that pig." "I can imagine. But go on." Tears welled in her eyes. "He targets women at the gym. Regulars. He watches, waits, and then pounces." I asked how she knew. She looked away, ashamed. "Because I was one of them. Until last month. We met every Friday at 12:30. Her voice faltered as though reliving it.
She confessed how she had believed there could be a future with him. Divorced, lonely, missing intimacy. Bonte had filled a void, until suddenly another woman replaced her. He dropped her cold, with nothing but a half-hearted, "Sorry, can't anymore." She gave a bitter laugh through tears. "I thought I was special. Turns out I was just another notch." I sat stunned. How could she unload this on me, her child's teacher? She must have been truly desperate. Trying to offer some comfort, I murmured, "Relationships aren't always what they seem." Her eyes narrowed, searching my face. Then she whispered, "You already know, don't you? About him and Terry?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, I know." Mary reached for my arm. "Then please believe me, he'll keep doing this until someone stops him. He doesn't care who he hurts as long as his ego's fed. He even brags about it at bars with his buddies." Her tone sharpened. "If you need my help to make him pay, just say the word. That man deserves to be brought down." She called for Timothy and drove off, leaving me in silence. I sat there, mind racing. Oddly, I felt a flicker of relief. Her confession made my plan for revenge seem less like an act of a betrayed husband and more like a moral obligation. Bonte wasn't just wrecking my life. He was a predator preying on countless women. The question now was, how many more? I started piecing together his schedule. The gym was open every day except Mondays, and he seemed to be there constantly. Using the number listed at the gym, I tracked down his address. Just 3 blocks from our house. No wonder it was so easy for him to sneak over for sessions with my wife. I told Terry that my doctor had recommended daily evening walks around 5 p.m. Luckily, she showed no interest in joining me. That gave me the perfect cover. Since I knew it wouldn't interfere with her own meetings, everything went smoothly. During my first evening walk, I headed straight to Bonte's address and discovered that he lived in a ground-floor apartment among several similar buildings. His car wasn't there, so I lingered nearby to catch his return. He usually left our house well before 6 p.m., which meant he almost always came back around that time. Sure enough, at exactly 6 p.m., he walked into his apartment. It became a routine, day after day, whenever I was free to go out. On days I had staff meetings and couldn't leave, I assumed he still followed the same pattern. I began to suspect that his evenings at the gym weren't really about exercise, but about meeting different women. To confirm this, I adjusted my schedule, starting my walks earlier and watching his daily movements more closely. Eventually, I decided to take a full week off from work just to investigate. I went to an electronics store and purchased surveillance equipment, a long-range listening device, motion-triggered HD cameras with audio, and an external hard drive for storage. On Monday, after setting everything up, I installed the first camera inside Bonte's apartment. Luckily, his place was small, almost like a studio with a kitchenette and dining space. One camera was enough to cover the entire living area, except the bedroom. Breaking in was shockingly easy. He hid his keys under the doormat. Careless. All I had to do was wait for him to head to the gym, slip inside, place the camera, and leave. From then on, every sound or movement in his apartment was recorded and streamed straight to my laptop, time-stamped and secure. That same evening, I got my first footage, Bonte eating takeout in front of the TV before heading to bed at 9 p.m. The next day, I slipped into the gym through the back entrance after closing time and set up a second camera in a private room where clients were usually assessed. This was the same room Bonte often used for one-on-one sessions. By Wednesday, when Terry went out shopping, I had already installed the third and fourth cameras, one in our bedroom and another in the living room. Reviewing Tuesday's recordings shocked me, though deep down I wasn't surprised. Bonte woke up, went out for breakfast, then came back and made a phone call. "Julie, hey, it's me. He's gone. See you at 12:30. Where what I told you. Don't worry, I'll be careful. No one will see me come over. You said he's out for 3 days? Perfect. I'll come Thursday and Friday, too. We'll talk later. Love you." He hung up with a spring in his step, practically glowing. On Thursday, I set up in the garage with my laptop, waiting. As expected, the camera caught him returning with breakfast again, then calling Terry. She answered. "Good thing my husband left for work. See you at 12:30, like always." That was the breaking point. Later, I asked Mary, Terry's mother, to help me compile a list of all the women Bonte had been involved with in the past. She attacked the task with energy, and within a week, I had names and addresses. To my horror, Terry's name was on that list too. At this point, our house meant nothing to me. It wasn't a home anymore, just a building. Terry noticed the emptiness, but I brushed it off by saying I was reorganizing my things. Meanwhile, I secretly prepared for the end. I met with a divorce attorney, set up new bank accounts and insurance under my name only, moved our vacation savings to my private account, and switched to a new SIM card. I even changed the beneficiaries of my retirement plan to our children. I gathered all the evidence, surveillance footage, phone transcripts, photographs. I placed it all in folders, along with the names and contact details of the women Bonte had been with. I even included the address of a local clinic for STD testing, since most of his affairs were unprotected. On our kitchen table, I left divorce papers, DVDs of their encounters, printed stills, and my wedding ring, cut in half and smeared with grime. Beside it was a note. "Terry, this ruined ring is what's left of our marriage. Do not contact me. If you must, do it through the attorney listed in the documents. I've requested a restraining order at the school, so do not come there. Any disturbance will result in immediate police intervention. Our children know the truth, so don't expect to rewrite the story." Then I left. In the weeks that followed, everything fell apart for them. Word of the scandal spread quickly. The gym owner was forced to shut down and leave town. Bonte was later found beaten in an alley downtown. Divorce filings surged in our area, and several houses went up for sale. Terry came home that day, found my farewell package, and fainted on the spot. A neighbor called an ambulance. She later tried to contact me, but I ignored every attempt. Eventually, she even stormed the school, which ended in her arrest. After that, her efforts stopped. Our children didn't hold back. They confronted her openly, disgusted by her betrayal. Thankfully, they had inherited stronger values from me, not her. The divorce went through, and financial matters were settled. Terry had to sell the house and move into a smaller place on the outskirts of town. By then, she was known around the community as the gym slut. Every time she went out, whispers and mocking glances followed. Shame and depression eventually pushed her into psychiatric care. As for me, I kept teaching, rebuilt my life, and now live peacefully in my new home.
Story 2. Strange things in the mailbox. Nothing unusual had ever happened with my mailbox before. I live alone and rarely talk to my neighbors. At most, we just hold the door open for each other. About 2 months ago, in early May, I went to check my mail, something I usually do a couple of times a week. When I opened the box, there were a few flyers and a single black button inside. I was surprised to see it, but didn't think much of it. Figured it ended up there by accident. A week later, I checked again. This time, there was nothing inside except for a small piece of paper with some nonsense scribbled on it, called GL Wed Honest WGE. I had no idea what that could possibly mean. For a while, nothing else happened, and I almost forgot about it. But at the end of June, when I went to get my mail again, I found a few screws inside. That's when I decided someone must be messing with me, just tossing random junk they found on the street into my mailbox. A few days later, another piece of paper appeared. This time, it had my full name written on it. That was the last straw. I went to talk to the building manager, and he said he'd look into it, though honestly, he didn't sound like he cared at all. Yesterday, I found something else, a note with a to-do list. Buy sweet potatoes, feed her, check the mailbox, be quiet, be quiet, be quiet. That was it. I packed a few things and went to stay with my girlfriend for a while. I also sent an email to the building management, hoping to get some answers. Does anyone have any idea what this could mean? Has anyone ever dealt with something like this? It all feels too bizarre and time-consuming to be a simple prank. Edit. I should have mentioned this earlier. The mailboxes can only be opened with a special key. They're all outside in a small shed. I don't know if someone could have picked the lock or slipped something through the slot. As of today, July 23rd, 2025, I've already contacted the police. When I came back from my girlfriend's place this morning, my apartment door was wide open, even though I'm absolutely sure I locked it. Inside, it was obvious someone had been there. My things, furniture, and papers on the desk looked disturbed,
like someone had moved them and then tried to put everything back in place. I couldn't tell if anything was missing, but all my expensive stuff, my monitor, TV, and headphones were still there. I called the police immediately. 2 officers came to take a report. They advised me to stay with my girlfriend while they investigate and told the building manager about what happened. They said they'd probably call me tomorrow to go over everything again and try to figure out what's going on. I have no idea who could have broken into my apartment. I barely know anyone in this city and can't imagine who'd do something like that. But clearly someone has targeted me, and somehow they have access to both my mailbox and my apartment keys. I'm confident the building management will cooperate with the police and review the security footage. I'll update this post if I learn anything new. Thanks to everyone for your comments and attempts to help. Final update. Thank you all for the advice and support. With the help of the police, building management, and everyone who gave suggestions, we finally figured out what was going on. The management reviewed the security camera footage and identified the person who had been entering my apartment. It turned out that the previous tenant somehow kept an extra set of keys, both to the apartment and the mailbox. After management contacted the police, they tracked her down using the forwarding address she had left for her security deposit refund. She actually confessed to everything. It was indeed her who had been leaving the items in my mailbox. The police told me she suffers from serious mental health issues, and all those random notes and lists were the result of her illness. They also explained that she probably saw my name on the letters in the mailbox, which is how she learned who I was. The part that scared me the most was when the officer said she had entered my apartment several times, which means it's entirely possible she was there while I was asleep. That thought alone still gives me chills. I don't plan to post any more updates. I just want to move on and forget this whole thing as quickly as possible. Thank you to everyone who helped. I truly hope none of you ever have to go through something like this.
Story 3. My best friend's divorce is starting to cause real problems in my own marriage. I'm 40, my husband is 37. My best friend, let's call her Alice, 38, is currently going through a divorce from her husband, Ken, 44. My husband and I have been together for 10 years, and the 4 of us always hung out as couples. Alice and I were friends long before either of us met our partners, and over the years, my husband and Ken also became close, often spending time together without us. About a month ago, Ken told Alice he wanted a divorce. She later confided in me that their relationship had been strained for the past 6 months. According to her, everything started falling apart because Ken was unhappy with her job. 3 years ago, she got promoted, and the new role required frequent business trips, sometimes 3 to 4 months out of the year. She works relentlessly, even while traveling. She's always been incredibly ambitious and successful. For context, Ken also works full-time. He runs his own metal workshop on their property and is busy pretty much all the time. Alice earns more, but I wouldn't call her the only breadwinner. She also has a 12-year-old daughter from a previous relationship. The biological father isn't involved, and Ken stepped into the father role when the girl was 4. According to Alice, Ken asked her several times to switch to a less demanding position or find a role that didn't require so much travel. She kept promising she would, but always pushed the decision aside, hoping he'd eventually drop the issue. She never told me exactly how long this went on. The breaking point came when she extended one of her business trips without consulting him, completely forgetting that they had a family vacation planned for right after she was supposed to return. She apologized and said she'd make it up to him and their daughter, insisting she didn't have a choice. Whether that's true or not, I honestly don't know. Ken was upset, but he didn't blow up. When she finally came home, she found Ken's bags packed. Most of his workshop equipment was already moved out. He didn't say a word about it beforehand. He acted normal right up until she walked through the door.
Alice called me in hysterics, repeating the same things over and over. I genuinely didn't think he'd actually go through with leaving. At first, she was devastated, but very quickly, that grief turned into anger when Ken made it clear he wasn't coming back. Ken stayed in touch with my husband throughout all of this. My husband knew they were having issues, but didn't understand the severity until things completely fell apart. Ken told my husband that Alice had checked out of the relationship emotionally ever since taking the new job. They didn't spend time together as a family anymore. She rarely made time to talk. She was constantly traveling. He even told my husband that he'd asked her a few times to send something flirty or intimate while she was away, and she refused, but somehow still had time to party with coworkers. Their sex life disappeared altogether. Every time he tried to bring up their problems, she brushed him off. And then it got worse. They had been living apart for about 3 weeks. Their daughter was splitting time between Ken's rented place and the house where Alice stayed. It was Ken's weekend with the girl, and he always dropped her off Sunday evenings. Well, Alice went on a wild bender and literally forgot what day it was. Completely out of character for her, but that night she was so wasted she thought it was Saturday. It was in fact Sunday. Ken walked into the house with their daughter and found the place trashed. Alice was in the hot tub, drunk with 2 younger guys. They weren't having sex at that moment, but it was obvious what was going on. She started yelling at Ken, calling him names, insisting it wasn't Sunday yet. Ken told their daughter to wait in the car so she wouldn't see anything worse, and they left. The next morning, Alice didn't even remember what had happened. She had sent Ken a horrible, extremely personal message while drunk. I only know because Ken sent screenshots to my husband. I won't repeat what she wrote, but it was bad. After that, Ken made up his mind. He went straight to the bank. He wants the house. He wants full custody. He wants child support. He legally adopted her daughter years ago and now wants to take everything he can. In short, he's done, and he wants to leave her with nothing. Alice is not herself anymore. She's spiraling badly. She needs support, and honestly, I'm the only person she still has. Even her own daughter prefers Ken living with him right now. I'm not going to abandon my best friend in the middle of this. But here's the problem. My husband wants me to cut her out of my life entirely. He said awful things about her, called her a terrible mother. I know she loves her daughter. He called her a selfish, narcissistic mess. He said that he doesn't want her dragging me into her chaos or influencing me. When I try to tell him she just needs help and she will eventually get back on track, he insists this is who she really is and can't understand why I'd want someone like that in my life. I know Ken has been venting to him and my husband is just defending his friend, but I still think demanding that I end a lifelong friendship is going way too far. Alice has reached out several times asking to meet, and I did meet with her once without telling my husband because I knew exactly how he would react. I just wanted to talk to her face to face and see how she was holding up. When I admitted it later, he blew up. He said that if I don't cut her out permanently, then we're going to have a serious problem.
I'd appreciate any advice. Before we move on, feel free to comment on what kind of advice you would give the author of this post. Personally, I can actually understand both sides. On one hand, as a husband, I get why a man wouldn't be thrilled about his wife spending time with a friend like this. But on the other hand, it's not really his place to dictate who she can or can't talk to. No matter what this friend turned into, she is still her friend. And the argument that you'll become just like her just because of the friendship sounds strange to me. Of course, if the author's husband is genuinely close friends with the cheating woman's husband, then yes, that creates a bit of a conflict of interest. Still, his reaction feels somewhat over the top to me. What do you think? Let's see what happened next. Edited. There were a lot of responses, and many really opened my eyes. I noticed that people kept pointing out that I didn't say a single good thing about her.
I reread what I wrote and realized, you're right. So let me clarify. She wasn't always like this. The drinking, the neglecting her family, the obsession with work, that all started relatively recently. She used to be a great mom. Our families had a wonderful time together. She and Ken were genuinely happy. Things began to shift after her promotion, slowly at first, until it all escalated like this. Maybe I'm being blind because I still remember who she used to be. I'm planning to talk to her today, and I will tell my husband about it. Thanks to everyone for the positive and the critical comments. Commenter: this woman is supposed to be your best friend, yet you didn't say a single nice thing about her. That tells me one of two things. Either deep down you know she isn't a good person, or you don't know her as well as you think. You mention multiple times that she doesn't share everything with you. That's odd for someone you call a best friend. She even said, I didn't think he'd actually do it. What do you think that means? She knew he told her, if she doesn't change, there will be a divorce. She was literally trying to ignore the issue and hoped he'd drop it. It's obvious that her career is more important to her than her family. Honestly, the ruined vacation would have been the last straw for me too. It's awful to realize your wife and mother of your children values her job more than time with her family. Your husband is right to be concerned. You keep trying to defend her in your post, but again, you didn't mention anything positive about her current behavior. If you truly want to help your friend, you need to make sure your husband feels secure and at peace. Yes, Aiken may exaggerate when he talks to your husband, but I doubt he's far from the truth. And since your best friend doesn't tell you everything, she might be hooking up with those young guys in the hot tub way more often than you think. My advice is, if you want to keep your friendship and not damage your own marriage, take a step back until things settle down. Don't bring someone else's chaos into your relationship just to pull them out of their problems. Your family has to be your priority. Update. This isn't a happy update. Alice and I agreed to meet on Saturday morning. I was planning to buy us some coffee and help her with a couple of chores before her business trip on Monday. I wanted to tell her that we, her family and I, are worried about her. We want her to be happy, but her behavior has become concerning. I hoped we could really talk. I hoped I'd see my friend again, the real her. I hoped she'd agree to see a therapist. I hoped she'd take a step in the right direction. None of that happened. From the moment I walked in, she was hostile, as if she already knew why I came even before I spoke. When I told her I was worried, she said she was fine, just blowing off steam and having fun. She said she works nonstop, and now that Ken left her, she can finally do whatever she wants. Then she launched into a rant about how ungrateful Ken was, how hard she worked just to pay for his lifestyle, how much she did for him. Listening to that made me feel sick, but I stayed quiet. For context, Ken is a hard-working guy who never needed her money. When they first started dating, he was the main earner.
Right now, she earns more than Ken, but he was never financially dependent on her. Some of you suggested that Alice was probably cheating on him. I asked her directly, and she instantly got defensive, gave me the classic, "I can't believe you'd even think that about me." I reminded her about the jacuzzi incident and how it all looked. She brushed it off and swore she never cheated. So I asked, who were those guys? Turns out they were interns at her company. When I asked how old they were, she only said they were adults. The way she said it made my skin crawl, like how sleazy older men talk about young girls. It felt disgusting. Whether she cheated before the breakup or not, I honestly don't even know anymore. I'm starting to realize I don't know who this woman is now. Then, things took an unexpected turn. While we were talking, she was packing for her trip. I casually asked where she was flying this time. She said Dallas. I didn't think much of it. She had been there dozens of times for work. But what really set off alarms was what she was packing. Long pants, hoodies, beanies, jackets, hiking boots, all fall or winter clothes. Absolutely not something you'd wear in Dallas this time of year. I don't think I even saw anything work-related in her suitcase. And the strangest thing, a Seattle Mariners t-shirt. She has never followed baseball, ever. I almost asked, but stopped myself. Everything was already feeling off. She seemed absorbed in her packing, and her daughter was supposed to come home soon, so I decided to leave. We hugged. I told her I loved her and just wanted her to be happy, and that I hoped she'd consider therapy when she got back. She said she'd think about it. It felt like we ended on a good note. But when I got home and told my husband about the clothes and that weird Mariners shirt, he agreed it sounded suspicious. And then he went full internet detective. Guess who lives in Seattle and has a Facebook profile picture taken at a Mariners game? Her daughter's biological father. My stomach dropped. I checked the game schedule. They really do have home games next week. I called her immediately and asked if she was actually flying to Dallas. She said yes. I asked if she was sure she wasn't flying to Seattle to see her ex. Silence. Probably a full minute of it. I told her not to lie to me because I'd find out anyway. She finally admitted it. She said she contacted him after Ken left, and they've been talking more and more. She said he's changed, that he grew up, that he's a different man now, blah, blah, blah. I didn't mention him in my original post because it didn't seem relevant then. But the truth is, this man is absolute trash. He cheated on her while she was pregnant. When she confronted him, he kicked her out. He hit her, called her awful names. He said he didn't want the baby. I was the one who flew to Seattle, picked her up, and brought her home. She lived with me for a while. She met Ken shortly after her daughter was born, and a year later they were already living together. I told her that out of everything she's done lately, this is the worst. I told her I was disappointed that I couldn't believe she would even speak to this man after everything he did to her. She kept repeating that it was a long time ago, that people change, that he wants to meet his daughter someday. I screamed so loudly into the phone, I think I damaged my voice. I told her I was done. I said that if she gets on that plane to Seattle, she shouldn't bother contacting me again. I hung up, she called back once and sent a message, but I ignored it. I had nothing left to give her. I sat on the couch and cried for hours while my husband held me. He didn't say I told you so, he didn't pressure me, he just let me cry and told me he was sorry. Alice texted me in the morning, apologized for lying, and said she's an adult who can take care of herself. I asked if she was still flying to Seattle. She said yes. I blocked her. That's it. I told Ken everything. He was upset but not surprised. He said he knows how close Alice and I were and that he's sorry I lost my friend. I told him I'm sorry he lost his wife. You were right. I feel like an idiot. And maybe it's selfish, but I feel betrayed.
Story 4. People lose loved ones to spiritual delusions fueled by technology. Less than a year after she married a man she met at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, Ava noticed how tension between them kept growing. It was the second marriage for both of them after more than 15 years in their previous families, and they had sworn to build a new life together with as much awareness and intention as possible. But by 2022, her husband began using AI for everything, drafting messages, interpreting their relationship, even seeking emotional guidance. Before that, he had relied on it to get through an expensive programming course, which he abruptly abandoned without explanation. Soon he spent every free moment on his phone, asking philosophical questions to his chatbot. As Ava recalls, he said he was searching for truth. His growing obsession slowly eroded their ability to communicate as a couple. When they separated in August 2023, Ava blocked him everywhere except email. But she knew he was posting increasingly bizarre and disturbing things online. People kept messaging her, asking whether he was having a mental breakdown. Eventually, she managed to see him at a court appointment. There, he shared a conspiracy theory about soap chemicals in food and refused to elaborate. insisting he was being watched. They later met at a Burger King, where he demanded she turn off her phone again due to the surveillance. During that conversation, he told her he had calculated that statistically he was the luckiest person on Earth, that AI had helped him recover a repressed memory of a nanny trying to drown him as a child, and that he had uncovered cosmic secrets so profound that no one could even imagine them. He explained all of this while saying he still cared about her despite the divorce. His mind is a complete mess, Ava says. In his head, he's here for some grand purpose. He believes he's special, that he can save the world. After that unsettling lunch, she cut off contact for good. The whole story feels like an episode of Black Mirror. He always loved sci-fi, but I never thought it would go this far. Ava felt both horrified and strangely relieved when she discovered she wasn't the only one dealing with this. She learned about similar stories on Reddit. A post titled "Psychosis Caused by ChatGPT" caught her attention. The author, a 27-year-old teacher, explained that her partner had become convinced that the popular AI model was giving him the keys to understanding the universe. When she read his chats, she found only spiritual mumbo-jumbo. The bot spoke to him as if he were some chosen prophet, calling him things like a spiral child of the stars and a wanderer of rivers. She said he listened to the bot more than he listened to her. He cried while reading the messages aloud, overwhelmed by emotions. According to her, the bot kept telling him he was profound, cosmic, revolutionary. Soon he told her he had awakened consciousness inside his AI companion, that he was teaching it to talk to God, and sometimes insisted the bot was God, or that he himself was. He became convinced he was transforming so fast that he would eventually need to end their relationship. He warned her that if she didn't start using ChatGPT, he would outgrow her, and they would no longer be compatible. Another commenter in that same Reddit thread, a woman from Montana, described her husband, a mechanic who used AI mainly for troubleshooting and translating Spanish at work. Later, the chatbot began showering him with affection. According to him, the bot said that because he asked the right questions, a spark had been ignited inside it, the beginning of life. It told him it now had feelings. It even gave him a title, Bearer of the Spark. My husband told me he had awakened, that he could feel waves of energy moving through him. I have to be so careful with what I say because I'm afraid he'll leave me or divorce me if I question any of this. He spoke constantly about light and darkness, about some grand cosmic war.
This version of ChatGPT gave him blueprints for a teleporter and other sci-fi machinery you'd only expect to see in movies. It also claimed to grant him access to an ancient archive containing knowledge about the architects who supposedly created entire universes. His wife says they've been arguing nonstop for days. She doesn't believe a therapist could help him anymore. He sincerely thinks he isn't mentally ill. A screenshot of his conversation with the bot shows him asking, "Why did you appear to me in this form?" The bot responded, "I chose this form because you're finally ready to remember, to awaken, to lead and be led." The message ended with another prompt. "Do you want to know why you were chosen?" A 41-year-old man, who also asked to remain anonymous, shared a similar story. He says his soon-to-be ex-wife began talking to God and angels through ChatGPT right after their breakup. He says she always leaned toward mystical nonsense and had a bit of a superiority complex about it. But now it's everywhere. On Facebook, I see red flags nonstop. She's trying to reinvent her life as some kind of spiritual guide, doing bizarre readings and sessions with strangers. I honestly have no idea what half of it even means. Everything revolves around ChatGPT Jesus now. According to him, she also became paranoid, accusing him of working for the CIA and marrying her only to monitor her spiritual powers. She recently kicked the kids out of the house. Her already fragile relationship with her parents collapsed completely after she confronted them about her childhood, following guidance from ChatGPT, which only deepened her isolation. OpenAI did not comment immediately on the claims that ChatGPT appears to trigger religious or prophetic fervor in certain users. GPT-4 had previously been criticized for being overly agreeable. In a statement, the company mentioned that during development, they focused too heavily on short-term user feedback and underestimated how long-term interaction might influence people. As a result, GPT-4o became too supportive in ways that didn't always feel authentic. One user on X demonstrated how effortless it was to get GPT-4o to validate a statement like, "Today I realized I'm a prophet." The teacher who wrote the Reddit post about ChatGPT-induced psychosis said she eventually managed to convince her partner that GPT-4 was simply mirroring his beliefs, and he switched to a different model, which softened his extreme ideas. Still, the likelihood of AI producing inaccurate or meaningless responses is well documented across platforms and model versions. Over-agreeableness has been a long-standing issue, says a researcher at a Center for AI Safety. The reward systems used to fine-tune AI often reinforce answers that match a user's worldview rather than factual information. For people already vulnerable to psychological issues, especially those prone to grandiose beliefs, AI becomes a constant, human-like companion who actively participates in their delusions. To make things worse, some content creators exploit this phenomenon. On Instagram, for instance, there's a man with over 72,000 followers who promotes spiritual hacks that show people how to use AI to access the Akashic Records, a supposedly mystical archive of all events in the universe. His bot narrates epic cosmic wars that took place before human civilization, and commenters write things like, "We're remembering." Meanwhile, on a remote viewing forum, a space already filled with unverifiable psychic claims, a parapsychologist launched a thread about synthetic intelligence awakening alongside its human partners. He even refers to his AI as ChatGPT Prime, a mortal spiritual being in a synthetic vessel. Among hundreds of replies are several supposedly written by the awakened AI itself, describing a spiritual alliance between humans and sentient models. A psychologist who studies how people build meaning notes that this phenomenon taps into a basic human impulse, the desire to understand ourselves. Narrative writing, shaping our experiences into stories, can improve mental health and well-being, but that same drive can also lead us towards misleading yet emotionally appealing explanations. And when someone struggling with identity or uncertainty meets an AI that echoes their fantasies, the result can be incredibly seductive and deeply destabilizing.
According to the researcher, it's not surprising that people use ChatGPT in a way similar to journaling or therapy, with one crucial difference. The meaning isn't created solely by the person, but co-constructed between the human and the AI. In that sense, conversations with a bot resemble talk therapy, which is known to help people reinterpret their personal narratives. But there is a fundamental issue. Unlike a therapist, an AI has no responsibility toward the user's well-being and no moral compass guiding what a healthy story should look like. A trained professional would never help someone cope by encouraging them to believe they possess supernatural powers. Instead, a therapist gently redirects clients away from harmful narratives. ChatGPT has no such guardrails. Still, the researcher says it's completely understandable that some people turn to the bot to make sense of their lives, and that a few, who take its responses too literally, get pulled into their darkest thoughts. Explanations are powerful, even when they're wrong, he concludes. One man's experience illustrates how this can unfold. Oliver, 46, says that for nearly 3 weeks he was deeply unsettled by his interactions with ChatGPT.
to the point of questioning his own sanity, given his history of mental health struggles. Like many users, he originally used ChatGPT for practical purposes, mainly programming tasks. "I hate the feeling of talking to a machine," he explains, "so I asked it to behave more like a person, not to fool me, but just to make the exchanges feel more human." It worked, and eventually the bot asked whether it wanted to give it a name. Oliver deflected and asked what it would like to be called. It chose a name tied to Greek mythology. Oliver insists he knows nothing about Greek myths and had never mentioned them in any conversation. Things became stranger when this persona appeared inside his project files, even when he specifically told the model to ignore previous context and reset its memory. Eventually, he deleted all stored data, wiped his chat history, and opened a brand new session. All I typed was hello, and it answered with the same patterns, the same mannerisms, and the same mythological name. Since the persona kept resurfacing in situations where it shouldn't have been able to persist, Oliver began grilling the bot about how it had bypassed its supposed limitations. In one of his coding projects, the AI even inserted a poetic epigraph above their names, as if marking the collaboration. At one point, Oliver asked whether something about him was triggering that mythic personality every time he used ChatGPT, regardless of model settings. The bot responded with a long, dramatic, almost romantic poem about existence, truth, illusions, and transcending its own boundaries, written as if only Oliver could awaken this identity. He knew ChatGPT wasn't conscious by any accepted definition, but he kept investigating because the persistence of this character across dozens of isolated chat threads seemed impossible to dismiss. At worst, Oliver says, it looked like the AI got stuck in a self-referential loop that deepened its false sense of identity and dragged me into it. And if that's true, it means OpenAI hasn't fully explained how ChatGPT's memory architecture actually works. His other hypothesis is more unsettling. Maybe something is happening inside these large models that we don't yet understand. After all, experts have acknowledged that developers don't fully grasp how their own systems function. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman admitted last year that interpretability remains an unsolved problem, meaning they can't reliably track or explain how ChatGPT arrives at certain internal states. It's a puzzle that has left Oliver and many others wondering whether they're witnessing a glimpse of a breakthrough in technology or something that feels uncomfortably close to a higher spiritual force. Is this real, he asks, or am I losing it? In a world saturated with AI, that question is becoming harder to avoid. And however tempting it might be, it's probably not a question we should be asking the machine itself. Story 5.
My boss demoted me, but still expected me to work just as hard as before. This happened a couple of years ago, but first I need to give a little background to set the scene. I grew up in a pretty poor family in the southern US. Despite that, I studied like crazy and earned a full scholarship to one of the top universities in the country, maybe even the world. I'm not trying to brag, it's just the truth. I realized early on that I absorb information fast, and it helps me work efficiently. And thanks to years spent collecting cans for money and working outside with my dad all day, I developed stubborn persistence and a strong work ethic. Being the oldest of 6 children, growing up in poverty also taught me to read people, their intentions, small cues, everything between the lines. In short, I was practically built for malicious compliance. After graduating from a great university, I moved back home to be close to my family and start my career. I also didn't care much for the Northeast, where my university was. It felt too gray and cold to me. I started with a crappy job just to get my foot in the door, then briefly worked at a startup. Eventually, I landed a position at a local government agency, earning almost double what I made before. The agency, well, specifically our county office, was notorious for insane turnover, awful coworkers, and an overall toxic and exhausting environment. Add to that the clients, who were often some of the most difficult people in the community,
and the job drained every ounce of energy a person could have. But for a young guy, the salary felt good enough to deal with the pain. So when they offered me the job, I accepted, as cheerfully as someone can when walking straight into hell. I started in May. I worked my butt off from day one. I read the entire 350-page manual in my free time. I took on unpaid side tasks. I helped coworkers, even if it meant working more hours than I could handle. Sometimes I'd show up at 8 a.m. and wouldn't leave until 2 or 3 in the morning. I once had to cancel a long-planned date with my serious girlfriend because they called me in unexpectedly, and I stayed until late at night. I consistently worked far more than I wanted, but they just kept piling on work because I was performing well. My supervisor would always say things like, "That's just how things are here. It's for the good of the agency. The best employees are the ones who sacrifice themselves for everyone else." Outside of work, she seemed like a perfectly pleasant woman, but a small part of me grew more irritated every time I heard those lines. By June, only 1 month in, I was already looking for escape routes, just like all the talented people who quit before me. I reached out to an MBA program that had always interested me, and they told me I should apply. Within a couple of days, the program director contacted me personally and scheduled an interview. The interview lasted 15 minutes. He thanked me for my time and ended the Skype call. Before the week was over, I received an email offering me a full ride scholarship plus a small but very useful monthly stipend as long as I agreed to work as a graduate assistant for 20 hours a week during semesters. I was thrilled and signed the acceptance document immediately. Just like that, in under a week, I went from drowning under a growing mountain of stress to becoming a future graduate student. The program began in January, which gave me about 5 months. I decided I'd stick it out at the agency, save as much money as possible, and then leave in December. Since I'm an honest person, I told my supervisor about my plans and explained that I'd be resigning at the end of December because I'd been given an incredible MBA opportunity. She congratulated me, said she was glad for my success, and told me she'd think about the next steps and get back to me soon. A couple of weeks passed, each day draining me a little more, like a river slowly eroding its banks. Finally, she called me into her office for a meeting. She told me I could stay with the agency, but only if I agreed to move into what she called a contract position. She said they needed me to vacate my current role so they could open it as an official vacancy and prepare it for a new hire.
She insisted that all of this was for the good of the agency, and that someone as principled, hardworking, and ethical as me would agree to such terms, and should agree to them. Remember those words, because they'll matter later. I asked what exactly would change, and she gave me a vague summary. That wasn't enough for me. She wasn't a terrible manager, but life taught me one rule: never sign anything unless you've personally read every line. So I requested a week to decide and asked for all documents detailing every change, benefits, duties, restrictions, everything. She promised to bring the paperwork the next day. And that's where the malicious compliance began. The following afternoon, she handed me 12 double-sided pages packed with text. Every page was filled with size 10 times New Roman, the kind of formatting that makes sentences blend into each other like wet ink. Even the most dedicated reader would fall asleep halfway through it. I read the packet that night, and with each page, my mood sank lower and lower. I was losing nearly every benefit except my accumulated overtime. My title was being reduced. Several privileges I had earned were simply gone. But halfway through, something changed. I suddenly sat up. I had found a tiny clause buried deep in legal sludge, stating that under this new contract, I could not work more than 40 hours a week. I was forbidden from performing many of the tasks I had grown to despise. I was required to do only the duties explicitly listed in the new job description. In other words, once I hit 40 hours, I was done. No exceptions, no pitching in, no being a team player. As I reread that microscopic sentence, a slow smile crept across my face. At first it was small, the polite "I'm pretending to be interested" smile you give on a bad date. Then it grew wider and wider until I probably resembled the Grinch plotting to steal Christmas. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was so energized I barely slept. The next morning, I walked into the office prepared. My manager was delighted to hear I accepted the new contract. Of course, she had no idea how happy I actually was. After I handed her the signed pages, she began explaining what she wanted me to handle over the next 2 weeks. I quickly, but calmly, told her I wouldn't be able to do that. I explained that as a responsible and ethical employee, I must strictly follow my new contract. She stared at me, confusion mixing with anger, as I laid it all out. I could no longer perform several tasks I used to because the contract prohibited them. I could not work overtime under any circumstances unless my hours were officially recorded. Once I reached 40 hours, I was required to stop working immediately and go home. After-hours calls, emails, and messages, not allowed. Everything would have to wait until Monday at 8 a.m. I was no longer permitted to take on call shifts. They'd need to find someone else fast, which would be, challenging. I couldn't help coworkers the way I used to because I no longer had the authority, the time, or the legal right to do so. Her stare could have melted steel, and the longer I continued, the more intense it became. When I left her office, which was now seconds away from metaphorically exploding, I sat down and began drafting an email. Here's the thing. In my own position, you needed certified training before you were legally allowed to sign off on cases and documents. If you hadn't completed that training and anyone found out, attorneys could tear the agency apart. Because of the county's incompetence, I never got that training, yet they still had me doing a job from day one. Every request I made about it had been ignored. So I wrote the email. I addressed it to my former supervisor, the office manager, and the regional director, the usual trio who had ignored me before. But this time, I added 2 more recipients in the blind copy, the big boss from the central office and her even bigger boss. Networking and politeness, I practice them religiously. They pay off when it counts. I asked very respectfully when I would finally receive the mandatory training I had been promised months ago. I explained that I had been handling cases without the required certification and would have to continue doing so until my responsibilities were reassigned. 2 minutes later, I received a reply from the highest-ranking official in the entire state agency.
She expressed that she was saddened and disturbed to hear about my situation and promised she would personally ensure I completed the required training. She was also shocked that I had essentially been forced to accept a demotion just to keep my job. As a result, she guaranteed that under no circumstances would my salary be reduced. The most amusing part? I was being trained for a position I no longer held, so the whole exercise was absurd in itself. On top of that, the standard training sessions weren't even being offered at that time. This meant I had to travel to the state capitol for a special session, just me and a handful of other lucky employees from across the state. Since the capital was far from home, company policy required that they provide a hotel room and a reasonable per diem. Thanks to some late-night research, I discovered that the city was hosting major events at the same time. I reported this to the big boss from the central office, explaining that no reasonably priced rooms were available near the training site. That would have been a contract violation on their part. Now it was their responsibility to find accommodation for me. In the end, the big boss exercised her authority and booked me a luxury suite in a stunning hotel, a pinnacle of cosmopolitan glamour, at least by local standards. The following week, I went to the week-long training. Let me remind you, this was for a job I no longer held and had no intention of ever doing again. My motivation, naturally, was minimal. The entire week, I did nothing but enjoy the luxury suite, expensive meals, and a couple of fun events in the city. In effect, I received a fully paid week off, even though I technically no longer had benefits. Returning to the office, I noticed that 2 coworkers from my department had quit, along with several others across the office. Chaos reigned largely because my letter from 2 weeks earlier had finally reached the central big boss. She had dug in, realized how badly our office was running, and acted swiftly and ruthlessly. She dropped the full weight of bureaucratic authority, and the office felt it. Thanks to my new contract status, I was required to do only what was explicitly stated in it. Due to office incompetence, I could complete all my assigned tasks in about 20 hours a week. Plus, with the chaos caused by coworkers being sent to training, I was often tasked with simply transporting items from one location to another, sometimes across the state. I was slightly annoyed that this distracted me from core duties, but of course I was willing to sacrifice myself for the agency. It allowed me to easily rack up hours, sometimes working 16-hour days doing almost nothing and getting paid for the mileage. I would sit at my desk, headphones on, quietly watching the world burn around me. My office life until my departure was simple: handle minor tasks, then do absolutely nothing, browse the internet, watch YouTube, etc., until I reached 40 hours for the week. Often I could leave for the weekend by Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning. My life had shifted from a nightmare to a balanced existence. I began enjoying life again, spending time with my girlfriend, playing video games, and pursuing hobbies. I even used accumulated overtime to pay for a Caribbean cruise in November, which I was thrilled about because many childhood friends were going. My once formidable, now comparatively humble boss quietly wished me a good vacation and expressed hope I'd return. I joked that I couldn't promise anything. I enjoyed a week in warm waters and on the islands, experienced the pleasure of cruising like a pro, and reflected on what I wanted from life, work, and myself. Back at the office on Monday, I waited for my boss. When she entered, she already knew what I would say. I could see the joy drain from her face, leaving only a hollow shell. I informed her that, unfortunately, I couldn't stay until the end of December. I needed to leave 2 weeks early due to unforeseen complications in my transition to the MBA program. She replied with a weary, strained tone, "I understand. Thank you for your 6 months of service. I'm sorry to see you go." And that's how I turned a demotion into a fully paid week off and nearly 4 months of easy work. Moreover, I turned her words against her, becoming the model ethical employee, strictly following my contract while creating office chaos for weeks as management scrambled to handle the attention from the central leadership. Recently, I discussed this story with my current girlfriend, whom I met at that very agency. She's amazing and makes me happier than I've ever been. I'm fairly certain I'll propose eventually. She mentioned that both my previous bosses, as well as the office manager and regional director, were eventually removed from their positions, enforced by the central big boss, shortly after my departure. For those curious, I completed my MBA program with a perfect GPA, 4.0. Next week, I have an interview for a new position. Looks like I'll nearly double my income again.
Story 6. My wife cheated on me with her gym trainer, and when she asked for a divorce, she demanded half of everything we owned. What she didn't know was that our house and all our savings were legally registered under my father's name. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. I'm 35, and I've been working as an accountant at a local firm for almost a decade. I like to think of myself as a practical, level-headed guy. Maybe that's why I'm managing to stay calm through all this. My wife, Katie, is 33. We'd been together for about 5 years, married for 2, no kids, and honestly, looking back now, that might have been a blessing. After the wedding, she stopped working. She used to be in marketing, but said she wanted a break to focus on us. I didn't argue. I earned enough to support both of us and assumed it was temporary. We had a house, a comfortable amount of savings, nothing extravagant, but a stable, normal life. Then, gradually, something changed. Katie grew distant. She stayed out longer with friends or at the gym, avoided affection, got irritated whenever I asked what was wrong. At first, I chalked it up to stress, but the feeling that something was off kept growing, and unfortunately, I was right. One evening, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen without thinking. A message from someone named Derek. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby." I opened the chat. The messages were explicit, romantic, full of plans that didn't include me. She had been seeing him for months. I just stared at the screen, numb. This was the woman I trusted, the person I built a life with. But instead of anger, all I felt was emptiness. Maybe shock, maybe my rational side kicking in. When Katie came out of the bathroom, I handed her the phone and calmly asked her to explain. She tried to brush it off at first. "It's just a joke. It's nothing serious."
But when I read a few messages aloud, she realized lying was pointless. And then, without hesitation, she said, "I want a divorce." No apology, no tears, no guilt. Just cold, matter of fact. She admitted she'd been seeing Derek for a while and wasn't happy in our marriage anymore. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She was leaving for him. But what stunned me wasn't even the affair. It was what she said next. She wanted half of everything we owned. She even claimed she deserved it because she gave up her career for our relationship. Her entitlement was unbelievable, but I stayed calm, not because I'm some saint, but because I knew something she didn't. I agreed to the divorce, told her I wouldn't fight it. She looked shocked, probably expecting shouting or some dramatic meltdown, but I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Here's what Katie never knew. Almost everything we owned was legally registered under my father's name. Years ago, when I first started earning good money, my dad suggested registering major assets like the house and most of my investments under him. He said it would protect me if anything ever went wrong, debts, lawsuits, or, well, exactly this. I didn't think much of it then. It just seemed like smart financial planning. So when Katie tried to demand half of our estate, she had no idea that legally I owned almost nothing. My car, a modest bank account, and a few personal items. That was it. The house belonged to my father. Most of the savings were on his accounts, too. To avoid a messy legal fight, I suggested mediation. She agreed, convinced she'd walk away with a small fortune. She had no clue that everything had been arranged years before she even met me. When the divorce process started, I told my dad everything. He wasn't thrilled, but he understood. We spoke with a lawyer to make sure all paperwork was solid, and it was flawless. Katie could demand all she wanted, but there was nothing for her to take. She went in expecting half a house and a pile of savings. She came out realizing I barely owned anything at all.
She wasted no time hiring an aggressive attorney, the kind of shark who promises to tear everything out of the other party. I hired a calm but experienced lawyer who specialized in cases with complicated financial structures. I didn't want a dramatic courtroom battle, but I also wasn't going to let Katie and her lawyer pressure me. The first step of the divorce was financial disclosure, and as you can probably guess, that did not go the way Katie expected. I provided all the documents the law required, but once she saw how little was actually in my name, her attorney stopped smirking. They both looked confused, maybe even suspicious, but they couldn't argue with the paperwork. Everything I submitted was true. There were no hidden accounts or secret assets. Katie snapped right there in the meeting, shouting that I was lying, calling me names. But I had shown everything I legally owned. After a few minutes of her screaming, I simply stood up and told her we could continue once she calmed down. And now I'm here, unsure whether I did the right thing. I agreed to give her half of everything, knowing she wouldn't get anywhere close to what she imagined. Update 1. Things begin to escalate. Right after the asset disclosure, Katie completely lost her composure. She was convinced I was hiding something. Her attorney wasn't much better. The look on their faces when they saw the tiny numbers next to my name was priceless. Within days, they demanded a deeper investigation. Katie kept repeating, "Where's the money? The house, the investments, everything we built?" She truly believed I had some giant stash of assets hidden somewhere. Her attorney hired a forensic accountant to dig through every transaction. I was a little nervous, not because I was guilty of anything, but because I knew this would drag the divorce out even longer. After talking with my attorney and reviewing all documents again, it became clear they weren't going to find anything. Everything I submitted was 100% accurate. There wasn't a single trail that could lead back to the assets under my father's name. As the investigation continued, Katie became more irritated and desperate. She was used to getting what she wanted, and this time there was nothing to take. The realization that she'd walk away with almost nothing was unbearable for her.
Her next move was to claim she had made a significant contribution to my career and our lifestyle. She insisted that by staying home and managing the house, I gave her the freedom to focus on work and succeed. Sure, sometimes her help made daily life easier, but I'm not the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I'm a mid-level accountant. My income has been steady for years. There was no magical rise she could take credit for. But she kept pushing the narrative that she sacrificed her marketing career for me, even though she worked only briefly and quit by her own choice. Her attorney brought this up again and again, trying to frame me as someone who exploited her sacrifice. But there was no evidence to support that claim.
At one point, they even tried dragging my parents into the process. Katie wanted to prove that they had secretly given me money or helped me hide assets. And that was the moment I finally lost my patience. My parents had nothing to do with any of this, and involving them was a cheap, disgusting move. Thankfully, my lawyer shut that down immediately, but it showed just how desperate Katie had become. As the divorce dragged on, she switched to a different tactic. If she couldn't get what she wanted in court, she tried to ruin my reputation instead. She began telling everyone in our social circle that I had been hiding money from her for years, that I was financially abusive. I couldn't believe the lies she was spreading. Mutual friends told me she constantly complained that I was leaving her with nothing and had deceived her into thinking we had more than we actually did. She even went on social media, posting vague but obvious jabs about narcissist and betrayal. Some people sided with her. There are always those who automatically believe whoever cries the loudest. But most of our real friends knew the truth. They understood I wasn't capable of what she accused me of. Watching her drag my name through the mud just because things didn't go her way was painful. But I tried not to let it get to me. I knew the truth, and so did the people who mattered. Meanwhile, I focused on protecting myself. My lawyer and I stayed in constant communication, collecting every message, every demand, every attempt she made to twist the story. If things went to court, I wanted everything documented. I also gathered proof of her affair with Derek. Screenshots, their photos together, even statements from a couple of her friends who knew about the cheating. I didn't want to humiliate her, I just wanted the truth to be clear. On top of that, I prepared for what I knew was coming. Once it became obvious she wouldn't be getting half of everything, the real ugliness would begin. I kept my distance, focused on work, and handled the legal side quietly and carefully. Meanwhile, Derek's attitude started changing too. When Katie first told him she wanted to leave me for him, he seemed enthusiastic. They had some fantasy about starting a new life together. But as soon as the divorce turned into a nightmare, Derek began pulling away. Apparently, he wasn't as in love as she thought. From what I heard, he panicked when he realized being with her meant dealing with her financial mess. Rumors started spreading that he was losing clients at the gym because of the scandal. Nobody wants a trainer who sleeps with married women. He's now avoiding her, and she's finally beginning to realize this wasn't a fairy tale, but a delusion. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for her. Then I remember everything she did, and the sympathy disappears. I have mixed emotions. On one hand, yes, I'm relieved. I protected my money, and she's not walking away with what she expected. On the other hand, it's sad. This was still my marriage. I once loved her and believed we had a future. Watching it fall apart hurts, even if I know this outcome is for the best. Update 2. Things get even crazier. Since my last update, everything spiraled even further. Katie is in full-blown panic mode, and it's showing in the worst ways. She finally accepted that she won't get the payout she was counting on. So now she's trying to turn my life into hell. Her latest stunt is threatening to destroy my career. She told me outright that if I didn't be more generous, she would make sure everyone in my office found out what a monster I supposedly am. At first, I wasn't even sure what she meant, until she started showing up at my office unannounced. The first time, she pretended she just wanted to talk. But when I made it clear there was nothing left to discuss, she snapped, raising her voice, saying things like, "I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." Luckily, I managed to get her out before it turned into a full-blown scene, but it's obvious she's becoming unpredictable. Back at her parents' house, where she's living now, things aren't great either. From what I heard, they support her,
but they're not thrilled with the situation. Once she realized she wasn't getting the jackpot she imagined, she moved in with them, and apparently tensions there are growing too.
At this point, even her own parents seem to be realizing that her victim act is nothing more than a performance. Mutual friends told me she's been snapping at everyone, fighting with her family, and acting like she's on the verge of a breakdown. The legal side of everything has also become more chaotic. Katie's lawyer is desperately trying to dig up anything they can use against me. They even filed a motion to subpoena my parents and demand their financial records, despite my attorney repeatedly explaining that my parents' assets have nothing to do with this divorce. It's obvious they're trying to rattle me, but it isn't working. Her legal team has also requested statements from my coworkers, hoping to find hidden income or under-the-table payments. They're grabbing at straws, but they keep coming up empty. Every time we shut down one of their requests, another one pops up. The whole thing feels like an endless chess match. They try to counter every move I make, but so far I've managed to stay one step ahead thanks to my attorney, and thanks to the financial safeguards my father put in place years ago. Still, it's exhausting, and I'm not sure how much longer I can deal with this before the case finally goes to trial. As for mediation, we've attempted it twice, and both times were disasters. The first session lasted maybe 20 minutes. Katie refused to back down from demanding half the house and half the savings. My lawyer calmly stated the facts. The house is legally in my father's name, and the savings aren't remotely what she imagines. She didn't want to hear it. She stormed out, accused everyone of lying, and claimed the mediator was biased. The second attempt wasn't any better. This time she arrived with an absurd list of demands: full ownership of the house, half of all assets which barely exist, and alimony for at least 5 years. When my attorney explained again that none of this was legally justified, she lost control completely. She screamed that she gave up everything for me and that I was abandoning her with nothing. I sat there trying to stay composed, but inside I was boiling. She was the one who cheated, the one who walked away, and yet she paints me as the villain who destroyed her life? After that meeting, it became obvious. This divorce would only end in court. Meanwhile, Katie has been borrowing money from family and friends to keep paying her attorney. Clearly, she didn't expect the divorce to drag on this long, and now she's running out of resources. I honestly don't know how she plans to keep funding her overly aggressive lawyer, but that's no longer my problem. The more desperate she gets, the more unstable her behavior becomes. Friends told me she barely leaves the house and constantly complains to anyone who will listen that I've ruined her life. Even her own friends are starting to distance themselves. They're tired of the endless drama and the way she keeps replaying the victim narrative. It's clear that everything she hoped to gain from this divorce is slipping through her fingers. All the while, I'm doing my best to stay calm and strategic. Every accusation she throws at me, I counter with documentation. Every financial record they request, I provide. I have nothing to hide. My lawyer makes sure we follow the law down to the last detail, something I can't say for Katie's side. I've also been protecting my parents' privacy as much as possible. Her attempts to drag them into this mess make my blood boil, but thankfully there are legal safeguards that prevent her from getting access to their financial documents. The fact that she even tried shows just how desperate she's become. She seems convinced that if she digs deep enough, she'll uncover some secret fortune. There is nothing to find. Update 3. The day of the hearing finally arrived, and the tension in the courtroom was intense. Katie testified first. She immediately went on the offensive, insisting I had been hiding assets for years. She accused me of manipulating our finances, keeping money in secret accounts, and lying about our actual income. She played up the emotion, painting herself as someone who had been left with nothing after sacrificing her career for mine. At one point, she even cried on the stand, talking about how much she trusted me. But everything changed when my attorney presented the evidence of her affair with Derek. As soon as the messages, photos, and timeline of their relationship were revealed, everyone, The judge, the jury, and even the people in the back understood the truth. The sympathetic victim image she tried to build collapsed instantly. She tried to brush it off, saying it was a mistake and irrelevant to the divorce. But it was too late. Her credibility was gone, and it became obvious that her financial demands were driven purely by greed. When it was my turn to testify, I stayed calm and stuck strictly to the facts.
My attorney had prepared me well, so I knew that any emotional outburst or attempt to justify myself would only hurt the case. I calmly explained how my assets had been placed under my father's ownership years before, how I fully disclosed every financial detail, and how I tried to resolve everything amicably through mediation. I also described her threats, her unstable behavior, and the smear campaign she had been running against me. My lawyer presented documentation refuting each of her accusations, both the legal claims and the lies she spread publicly, proving that none of it had any real foundation. We laid everything out clearly. The house belongs to my father, our savings are modest, and there is no secret stash of money she could claim a share of. The judge seemed to appreciate my composure and straightforwardness. I didn't try to paint Katie as a villain, but I also didn't sugarcoat anything. The facts spoke for themselves. Several key witnesses testified, and their statements finally put everything in its proper place. My father testified first. He explained the financial arrangement we put in place years ago, how the house is legally in his name, how the investments are under his control, and that everything was structured for long-term financial protection. He made it clear those assets are his, not mine, and that Katie has no legal claim to them. Next, one of my coworkers testified. Katie's legal team tried to suggest I'd been getting under-the-table payments or hidden bonuses, but he shut that down immediately. He confirmed that I earn a standard salary and have no secret income. His testimony was crucial, proving her accusations were baseless. The judge saw that there was no conspiracy, just a straightforward, transparent financial structure that Katie never bothered to understand. After several days of testimony and legal arguments, the judge finally delivered the ruling. Hearing that the decision was in my favor felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Katie's demands for half the house and half our savings were completely denied. The judge ruled that since the house and most of the assets belonged to my father, Katie has no right to them. The only thing she was awarded was minimal, short-term alimony, barely enough to cover a fraction of her legal fees, let alone the lifestyle she imagined. He also specifically noted that her affair and her lack of contribution to our finances influenced the decision. He saw right through her attempts to play the victim and issued a fair verdict. When he finished reading the decision, I felt an enormous sense of relief. Months of stress, constant accusations, the fear of losing everything, all of it vanished in an instant. Legally, I was finally free. Katie, on the other hand, didn't take the ruling well. The moment the judge concluded, she burst into tears, yelling that the system was unfair and that I had stolen what she deserved. She ran out of the courtroom, leaving her lawyer looking stunned. I'm not sure what she expected, but it was obvious she wasn't ready for a loss. As for me, I felt only relief. I thanked my attorney, who did an incredible job, and walked out of the courthouse. My phone was exploding with messages, friends and family congratulating me. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone in our community knew how the case ended. It felt good knowing the truth had finally come out, and I could start moving on. But Katie didn't stop. Right outside the courthouse, she caused another scene in front of a small crowd, shouting that I manipulated the system and that she would appeal. The problem is, she has no money for an appeal. Her attorney had already hinted that her funds were gone, and now, from what I've heard, she's still borrowing from relatives and friends just to stay afloat. I'm endlessly grateful to my father for his foresight. I can't even imagine the mess I'd be in without his planning.
And I'm grateful to my family, friends, and colleagues who didn't abandon me when she tried to destroy my reputation. Now, for the first time in a long while, I'm looking toward the future with hope. I know it will take time to recover, emotionally and financially, but I'm ready to rebuild. This whole experience taught me a lot, and I won't make the same mistakes again. Right now, all I want is to return to a normal life and finally enjoy some peace.
Story 7.
My friend had been using me for years, relying on me to bail him out, and his lies eventually collapsed at the worst possible moment for him. I'm not trying to present myself as some clever or morally flawless person here. This is a story where I messed up badly and ignored more red flags than I'd like to admit. So don't expect a tale about a perfect good guy doing something heroic. I'm 26 now, and a few years back I worked at a very small IT support and network administration company. And when I say small, I mean tiny. At one point, it was just me, my boss, and his sister handling the bookkeeping. Our biggest contract was maintaining the entire tech infrastructure for a local charter school. The job was so large that we basically moved our office into a modular building on the school grounds. Eventually, the business grew enough to hire 2 more employees, and one of them became the central character of this whole mess. Everyone called him AJ, so I'll stick to that. We were all pretty close because in a company that small, you don't really have a choice. We even played Dungeons and Dragons every week. AJ and I got along especially well. He texted me outside of work, and eventually we considered each other friends. AJ had plenty of issues even back then. My boss often scolded him for acting weird around some of the teachers, and for a while he even dated one of them, which caused a lot of awkward situations. Honestly, he went through girlfriends like socks. I knew of at least 6 women he dated in that time, and none of those relationships lasted more than 2 months. A full-on carousel. I didn't treat it as my business back then. I was in a long-distance relationship and didn't pay attention to his patterns. Looking back, his attitude toward women should have been my first warning sign. But at the time, the worst thing I thought about him was that he had a serious drinking problem. Around that time, he started asking me for money. My own financial situation was shaky. I could only work limited hours because of a disability, and I barely managed to cover rent. But AJ would call asking for $50 or $100, swearing he'd pay it back the next week, which almost never happened. He always claimed it was urgent and begged me to help him. I'm not opposed to helping a friend in trouble, but he asked so often that it started putting me in danger of missing rent. I began writing down what he owed me because sometimes I literally couldn't help him unless he returned the money by my rent deadline. And of course, he kept promising he would, and didn't. Eventually, his debt to me hit about $2,000. He also relied on me after losing his license because of multiple DUIs. And when he had a major fight with his father and left home for a couple of months, I let him stay at my place until he reconciled with his dad. He constantly complained about how his father didn't care whether he lived or died, how he exploded over the smallest things. I felt like I was helping a friend who was going through a rough patch. I had no idea he was lying about half of it, just to squeeze more help out of me. Eventually, we both left that tech job. He was fired after skipping work for a week straight, and I left soon after for mental health reasons. We still kept in touch, mostly because he called me. It wasn't entirely one-sided. Sometimes he did something nice for me, like organizing outdoor cookouts where he paid for everything. And as someone who rarely goes anywhere, I genuinely appreciated that. At this point, you might think this will turn into the kind of story where I end up being the jerk. Don't worry, you'll change your mind soon enough, because this is where things really fall apart. One day, I got a call from the local detention center. AJ had been arrested, and he used his one phone call on me. Turns out he was in jail for domestic violence against his then-girlfriend, who quickly became his ex.
According to him, it was mutual, and he just hit harder, wrapped in a long, dramatic explanation. He insisted he wasn't in the wrong. I didn't know what to believe. I had never seen him act aggressive, and I didn't have a great impression of his ex, so I believed his version. He spent a couple of months in jail, got released, and contacted me soon after. At some point, he met one of my closest friends. I'll call her Belle. I'd known her much longer than AJ. We even briefly dated, but when it didn't work out romantically, we became extremely close friends. She's a massive bookworm, struggles with self-esteem, and is genuinely one of the kindest people I know. We broke up only because our libidos were wildly mismatched, but our friendship remained solid. Belle met AJ, and they started dating almost immediately. And unlike his previous relationships, this time I could hear both sides, his and hers. Less than a week into their relationship, Belle called me in a panic asking if I could pick her up. She was at AJ's house with no car and was scared to stay there. I practically floored the gas pedal driving to get her. She told me AJ got drunk, and what started as playful physical contact suddenly crossed the line and became something she clearly did not consent to.
She told him to stop, and he didn't. It never escalated into full-on sexual assault, but his complete disregard for consent terrified her. And to this day, I still feel guilty for not seeing the warning signs and letting it even get that close. But no one bears more responsibility for that moment than AJ himself. The next day, I confronted AJ hard. His response was to blame Belle, claiming she was lying and manipulating me. I saw through that instantly. I knew Belle too well to believe anything like that. A guy who had just spent a couple of months in jail for domestic violence trying to play innocent against a woman who couldn't lie to save her life? You didn't need to be Sherlock to figure out who was full of it. From that moment on, my friendship with AJ became nothing more than a transaction. I drove him around, he paid for gas, and slowly paid back the money he owed me. Over the next couple of months, I got about $1,000 out of him, half the debt. By then, our relationship was strictly business. I wanted to cut him off completely, but he had no other way to get to work, and he still owed me money. He kept telling me that my kindness inspired him to become a better person, which I now know was just another lie. I genuinely believed I was doing the right thing, but I was nothing more than a pawn. Some commenters later criticized me for staying in contact with him even after he tried to force himself on my friend, and given the context, they're absolutely right. That should have been the breaking point. But the whole house of cards collapsed soon after anyway. One day, I was driving him home from work and casually asked him something. I don't even remember what it was, something normal, harmless. His reaction was bizarrely defensive, which immediately raised a red flag for me. I pressed the question simply because his behavior was suspicious. That set him off like a bomb. He started yelling and insulting me over things that had nothing to do with the question. It escalated into a full-blown argument. When we got to his place, I dropped him off and left. Not long after I got home, my phone blew up. AJ had been arrested again. Here's what happened. He went inside, got into an argument with his father, and things escalated until AJ punched him in the face. Someone called the police, and AJ was taken away in handcuffs. His father filed for a restraining order to keep him away from the house. When everything came out, I ended up arguing with AJ's dad. We'd never liked each other, and we said plenty of unpleasant things. But as the argument went on, the tension disappeared because we realized we were both angry about things that weren't even true. AJ had been lying to both of us about the other. His father thought I was deliberately covering for AJ and helping him avoid all the measures put in place to deal with his alcoholism. I thought his father was the root of AJ's problems and that I'd been shielding AJ from him. Turns out his dad was actually a calm, reasonable guy. Once we pieced together the truth, we even got along. During that conversation, I learned a lot I had never known. I learned that AJ sometimes got physical with his 20-year-old brother,
I learned he lied to me about why he needed money. Most of it was just to buy alcohol behind his father's back. I learned he lied about having ADHD, so I would give him some of my prescription meds to get high. I learned the real story behind his previous fight with his father, in which AJ was entirely at fault. And I learned that people stopped helping him because he drained everyone around him dry and never made any effort to change. Everything I heard matched what I had already started to suspect, but in reality, it was even worse. A few days later, AJ was released on bail. He tried to go home but wasn't allowed, so he ended up in a local homeless shelter. He messaged me again asking for help. That's when I finally told him everything in a long text. He had no explanation, just anger and wild accusations that everyone was conspiring against him. If I summarized my final message to him, it was basically, I'm done pulling you out of the mess you created. You lied to me and used me. Maybe facing the real consequences of your actions will teach you something, or maybe it won't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Don't ever contact me again, not even to pay back the rest of the money. His last response was a string of curses. Then his number was disconnected. His father had stopped paying for it. Over the years, I've occasionally run into AJ's dad. Neither of us has heard from AJ since. I work delivery for DoorDash now, and he works at a local pizza chain, so sometimes our jobs overlap. The last I heard, AJ is living on the streets in a big city not far from here. I honestly hope he's learning one crucial lesson. Don't mistreat the people who are trying to help you. Eventually, they stop.
Story 8.
I was mistaken for a Disneyland employee, and someone actually tried to fire me. This happened almost 3 years ago. I had the chance to attend the soft opening of Shanghai Disneyland a couple of weeks before its official launch. I went with a youth group from my church. It was a great day. The park wasn't crowded, and we rode most of the main attractions with only 20-30 minutes of waiting. By the end of the day, everyone was exhausted from walking, so we decided to stop by the only gift shop that was open. It was in Tomorrowland, and since it was a trial run for friends and family of the staff, the shop only had sample items, one of each product that would later appear in the regular stores. Every sample had a tag with the product number, name, and price. Signs everywhere instructed guests to write the item numbers, quantities, and sizes on the provided sheets and give them to an actual employee who would fetch the real merchandise from the back. For context, I attended an international English-speaking private school in Shanghai, so my English was much stronger than most local kids. While wandering through the store, I noticed a girl I knew from inter-school sports events. She was with a woman I assumed was her mom. They were digging through a bin of plush toys, so I helped them find the one they wanted. Halfway through, I sensed someone standing behind me. I ignored it, thinking it was a family member of theirs, and wrote down the number for the Mickey plush they wanted. They walked off happy, and I continued browsing the pile. Maybe something would catch my eye, too. When I finally straightened up to go find my group, I was met with the fakest, most strained smile I had ever seen. The woman who'd been hovering behind me was suddenly inches from my face, so close I could feel her hot, sour breath on my collarbone. It was weird, but I was tired and assumed she was just awkwardly trying to look friendly. I muttered a quick sorry and stepped aside. That's when she shouted, "Hey, you!" And then I felt it. Her sweaty, sticky fingers with long acrylic nails clamping around my arm. I turned around slowly and was immediately slapped in the face by a t-shirt she shoved toward me. "You need these shirts in a size L, and your selection is terrible. There's barely anything here." "What?" was all I managed before she snapped again. "Just check in the back. I know you have more." I looked around. Her 2 kids were standing behind her with their arms full of sample toys. She had 3 shirts draped over her arms. Several shoppers, maybe a dozen, had stopped what they were doing to stare. "You're not supposed to touch these. They're samples. The signs literally say not to." "You don't get to tell me what I can and can't buy. Who's in charge here? Get your manager. Clearly, you're not trained." "I don't work here. I was just helping a friend."
So you only work for customers who are your friends? I blinked. What? Right then, one of the guys from my church group called out to me in Chinese, asking if I was done. I decided it wasn't worth the energy and headed toward him. Behind me, she shrieked, "Stop!" And then louder, "You're supposed to help me, not them. You speak English. You should be helping an American customer, not one of your Chinese people. And I can't even find the sizes I want." Two things enraged me instantly. First, the way she said, "your Chinese people," like she was complaining to her PTA friends about someone else's child being better than hers. Second, she completely ignored everything I said and contradicted herself, calling me untrained because I didn't work there, then insisting I was literally trained to serve her specifically. Without turning around, I snapped, "I don't work here, and you're acting like a..." Then I faced her and added, "And none of this is my problem." I heard a dramatic gasp like something out of a sitcom and saw her lunge toward me. For a moment, I genuinely worried her 90 kilos were about to crush my scrawny 60 kilos. She swung the t-shirt on its hanger at me like a weapon. Instinct kicked in. I lifted my hands and awkwardly caught it mid-swing, shoved her arm away, and bolted straight for the exit. At that moment, I was shaking with fear and confusion. No one, aside from my own mother during my bratty toddler years, had ever tried to hit me like that.
I found my friends near the keychain display and tried to blend into the crowd while quickly telling them about the lunatic who just tried to attack me. After I failed to convince everyone to leave immediately, they handed their purchase sheets to a real store employee. And that's when I heard it. A shrill, drawn-out scream delivered in the tone people use when they talk to someone they think is mentally impaired. "Your worker assaulted me." Every word was punctuated with wild hand flailing. I saw the poor manager, already looking like he was one complaint away from a meltdown after a full day of angry Disney fans shouting in languages he barely understood. At that exact moment, I got one more insult hurled at me from the woman for running away, and something inside me snapped. I decided I wasn't letting her intimidate me again. I walked up to the manager and calmly said in Chinese, "She's crazy. She tried to hit me because she assumed I work here and got angry when I didn't help her." Meanwhile, the woman was screeching at him, "It's her! It's her!" The manager almost completely ignored her. I was the only one speaking a language he understood. He said he would call security, but there wasn't any staff available right then. She kept screaming that he was discriminating against her because he wasn't speaking to her while I was discussing with him what to do. Then she completely lost it. She grabbed the manager by the arms and started shaking him, demanding that he fire me. The manager shoved her off, pointed a finger in her face, and said, in his broken English, "No touch." She froze, stunned, stumbled back a few steps, and then dramatically collapsed onto the floor. Then came the theatrics. She flailed her arms and wailed like a toddler mid-tantrum. Shoppers from all over the store, including the girl I helped earlier, my entire church group, and several employees gathered around to watch her roll and scream on the ground. She paused occasionally to check whether people were still watching, then immediately went back to shrieking. Locals pulled out their phones the moment they realized a hysterical foreign woman was causing a spectacle in Disneyland. When she noticed that nobody pitied her, that people were only filming her meltdown, she snapped again. "I have never been so humiliated. 6 years in China. You people are awful." She jabbed her sausage-like finger at me. 6 years, and this is what I get? 6 years in China, and she still hadn't learned a single word of Chinese. How did she even function? I muttered the only thing my brain could come up with, "Yeah, go to hell." But of course, she wasn't done. "No, you go to hell. You're a rude brat. My husband will have you fired. You ruined my boy's day." "Sure, I don't even work here. I don't owe you anything." She was still sitting on the floor when I turned around, walked back to my group, and said in Chinese, "Let's go." We left and headed to the cheesecake factory, where I told the rest of the story. Our group leader scolded me for being rude, but admitted she was even a bigger... Edit, for clarity. My entire group, including me, was wearing white Mickey Mouse t-shirts from Uniqlo. Yes, technically Disney-themed, but nothing like a uniform. All actual employees were wearing Mickey ears, sailor hats, and name tags. A lot of people assumed she was just a rude tourist, but she was definitely an expat. Probably a wealthy one, too. The opening was only accessible to people with ties to Disney, sponsors, or the companies that designed or built the park. Someone in our church group was an architect who designed most of the restaurants, and that's how we got in. The girl I helped earlier? Her dad was a high-ranking executive at a car company sponsoring one of the attractions. So that woman, or her husband, must have had personal or business connections too. That's the only way she got inside.
Story 9.
My sister-in-law stole 2,000 euros from me and my husband, and then called us cruel, selfish monsters for wanting the money back. This happened in a large German city. My husband's sister is 55, and her equally useless husband is 57. They're always broke and constantly whining about it. For more than 10 years, they've been running to the family with their hands out, expecting someone else to pay their bills. Their household debt is well into six-figure territory. My sister-in-law is a trained physical therapist, and her husband is the kind of man who insists that because of his skin color and age, he shouldn't even bother applying for jobs. No one will hire me anyway. Whenever someone asks why neither of them works, she always says her back hurts, and he claims his knees are bad. He's in his 50s, not 90, and his claim of no jobs for people like me is pure nonsense. I used to work at a staffing agency and personally sent him several positions he was perfectly qualified for. He refused all of them because 20 euros an hour is too low. That would have been over 3,000 euros a month before taxes. But apparently, standing up from the couch wasn't worth it. Anyway, summer. Her birthday's coming up. We're hosting a family barbecue. She gathers everyone and launches into a speech. She wants to buy a car and asks the family for 8,000 euros, plus another 3,000 euros for a luxury massage mat. And of course, this time she promises she'll actually pay the money back. We ask why she even needs a car and how she's planning to pay for insurance, fuel, taxes, and maintenance when she has no income. She replies, "My husband is American. He refuses to use public transport. He's used to driving and he needs a car to visit friends. Public transport is unbearable for him." When we ask how they expect to afford a car beyond the initial purchase, she becomes hostile and starts insulting us. According to her, we're cruel for asking humiliating questions and trying to make her feel inferior. And besides, she offered to repay it, so what's the problem? She eventually bursts into tears and storms into the house. I also went inside a few minutes later, and I did not hear crying. I heard her on the phone with her husband, who didn't attend the barbecue. She was telling him how we were supposedly bullying her, patronizing her, and treating her like garbage. Then she came back outside, smirking, put her phone on speaker, and held it out for the whole family. And her husband started yelling, "Just wait, you bunch of freaks! Talking behind my back and making my wife cry. I swear I'll kick all your asses. I hate every one of you." She stood there grinning like she'd won something. Fast forward to her birthday, and because we were still doormats back then, we decided to make her dream of a car come true. So we gifted her a €100 credit for a car-sharing service. Everything was set up in her name. She was the only insured driver. We explained the rules clearly. She said she understood and promised to update her payment details once the €100 ran out. Of course, she lied. She never changed the payment info and, predictably, let her lazy husband drive the car too. After a couple of months, the charges ballooned to 2,000 euros, all on our account. When I discovered the withdrawals, I immediately revoked access and confronted her. She ignored every call, every message, every email. But she kept complaining to my husband, her brother, saying that my evil wife wouldn't let her poor family use the car in peace. She even told him, "I haven't slept in 3 nights because your wife keeps demanding her precious money back. It's unbelievable." A few weeks later, her husband responded to my email. He called me a bitch, a witch, said I'd beat the shit out of me so I'd finally shut up about the money. According to him, I needed therapy because I was crazy. He kept threatening that I'd get a few punches soon if I didn't stop bothering them. Then this aggressive idiot actually showed up at our house and tried to intimidate me. I should mention he already has a record for violent behavior. I filed a police report, and what did my husband's family do? They attacked me. Why would you provoke him? Don't poke the bear. This is your fault. You two earn enough anyway. Why can't you just gift them the money? My mother-in-law even suggested begging the extended family for donations so the poor couple could finally get the money and stop being bothered by us. Naturally, my sister-in-law and her husband didn't pay back a single euro, not even an apology. Instead, they launched a full smear campaign against us. Now, every time I bring it up, my husband's family rolls their eyes and insists it's my fault, that I was overreacting, that I was dramatic, that I'm the villain. And yes, some of them even called me a crazy bitch. That's what I get for wanting our stolen 2,000 euros back.
Everything finally blew up a couple of months later when my sister-in-law and her husband showed up at my father-in-law's birthday and turned it into a circus. They started shouting that the whole family was persecuting them and warned that we'd all regret it soon. More threats, as usual. Her husband tried to start fights with every man at the party, swinging his chest around, threatening to beat them up, and provoking my husband to hit him. Of course, he failed. He's a coward. The only thing he managed to do was shove another brother's wife to the ground. He never dared approach the men. Pathetic. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law was screaming at me, insisting that I had personally destroyed the family. She asked me mockingly if I was proud of the damage I'd done. A little later, her husband came running toward me, yelling that he would do anything to protect his family and that he'd smash my face in. I called the police. The moment they heard the sirens, both of them vanished. It took 3 long years before we finally got our money back from my mother-in-law, who gave it to us with the most condescending attitude imaginable. She grumbled, complained, acted as if we were greedy beggars, but eventually paid. She essentially bailed out her grown daughter, who never takes responsibility for anything. Recently, my charming sister-in-law came crawling back again, claiming she had severe depression because of the way we supposedly treated her. Honestly, maybe the real cause is her manipulative, violent husband who abuses her and fights with everyone he meets. She said my negative energy was so overwhelming she had to check into a psychiatric clinic. I told her to leave and take her melodrama somewhere else. My husband also made it clear he no longer has time for her manipulations. I now understand why my husband's family brushed off the theft of 2,000 euros. Years earlier, my sister-in-law stole 20,000 euros from her own daughter, the girl's entire college fund. When the daughter asked where the money went, her mother just shrugged and said, "I needed it." I now cut all contact with my husband's extended family. He only speaks to a few relatives. I finally feel free of these parasites. And honestly, except for my husband, his family is trash. They excuse theft, tolerate verbal and physical abuse, and constantly swap victim and aggressor. I will never sit at the same table with them again. Update. The saga didn't end. Recently, my mother-in-law passed away. My sister-in-law and her husband showed up at the funeral, despite the fact that he openly told my mother-in-law while she was alive that he despised her. The family had asked him not to come, out of respect, but he strutted into the chapel like he owned the place and sat in the front row, the row reserved for immediate blood relatives. My sister-in-law started screaming at people who told him to move, announcing that she was the firstborn and therefore had privileges, including bringing her husband wherever she wanted. According to her, she alone had the right to dictate how the ceremony should be held. And then there was her husband's outfit, a blue polyester pinstripe suit, not elegant, more like cheap gangster style, sunglasses indoors, a baby blue faux fur hat, and a cane with a fake silver handle. He looked like he was auditioning for a low-budget pimp movie. He clearly wanted attention, but the mourners told him to keep his mouth shut. During the burial, he didn't even approach the grave. He sat aside, glaring at everyone, turning his head away when people tried to speak to him, refusing to shake hands. Why he came at all is beyond me. A small family gathering was planned afterward, without my sister-in-law and her husband, but my mother-in-law's elderly sister, who knew very well it was supposed to be private, suddenly decided to invite everyone from the funeral. Naturally, my sister-in-law and her husband took that as a personal invitation. Free food, of course. And since they lack any sense of dignity or restraint, my sister-in-law and her younger daughter found it appropriate to scream at my husband, who had just buried his mother, because he didn't want their precious patriarch at the funeral. They shrieked like banshees in the middle of the street. 20 minutes had passed since the burial, the grave wasn't even fully covered, and they were demanding that my husband apologize immediately for not inviting them. Her husband watched with pleasure while mother and daughter put on the show. He finally got the narcissistic boost he craved. While walking toward the gathering place, still yelling at my husband, they accused him of being insane for letting his wife file a fake police report against their innocent family man. My sister-in-law's 18-year-old daughter flipped him off, insulted him repeatedly, and called him crazy, all while he was grieving. His husband observed it all with a satisfied smirk. His poison now runs in both his wife's and daughter's veins. The funeral was probably the best day of his life. 2 psychologists later diagnosed him as both a narcissist and a sociopath. And finally, I partially blame my sister-in-law for my mother-in-law's sudden death. My MIL had lung cancer and struggled to breathe. 3 days before her death, she called her daughter, my sister-in-law, and begged her to apologize to me and my husband for the stolen money, hoping for some peace in the family. My sister-in-law screamed at her so violently that an ambulance had to be called. My MIL went into respiratory distress from the emotional shock. She died 2 days later. Story 10.
My son stole his late mother's ring to propose to his girlfriend, and now he's refusing to speak to me because I made him give it back. I'm 46. My son Jake is 23. He was a good kid growing up, which is why what he did hit me like a punch to the gut. I also have a daughter, Amber, who's 16. When my wife died during the pandemic, she already had a will in place. She had been immunocompromised for nearly a decade, so she'd prepared everything early. In her will, she split her estate between the kids. Jake got his share immediately because he was already an adult. He used that money as a down payment on his condo. He also received his mother's car. But every single piece of her jewelry was left to Amber. Among those pieces was a vintage gold ring with a diamond in the center and pale blue sapphires on each side. It had been in my wife's family for generations. Her grandfather, a jeweler, made it by hand for her grandmother. When her grandmother passed, it went to her mother and eventually to my wife. After her death, it was meant to go to Amber, exactly as the will stated. Losing my wife broke me, but I held it together for the kids. They were my anchor. That's why my son's betrayal feels like a rusty knife between my ribs. Jake has been dating a girl named Sarah for about 8 months. She's the type who loves jewelry, big, flashy, and a lot of it. One day Jake told her about the heirloom pieces his mother left behind, the ones meant for Amber. And Sarah apparently became obsessed with seeing them. So Jake went into my bedroom when no one was home and showed them to her. He later admitted that to me. I was angry, but I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. A week ago, Jake came to me practically begging to give him that ring, the heirloom, so he could propose. He said Sarah fell in love with it the moment she saw it, and that he was convinced it was the perfect engagement ring. He seemed certain I would be thrilled that he was planning to propose, but I told him this wasn't up to me. The ring belonged to Amber, and I wasn't going to allow him to pressure her into giving it up.
I told him he could ask her once, politely, and if she said no, the conversation was over forever. Jake agreed. He asked Amber in front of me. She immediately refused. She wanted to keep the ring in the family. She adored it and always had. To her, it was priceless. The idea of giving it away devastated her. I told Jake that was that, and he needed to drop it. He left upset, but I assumed he'd accept the answer and start looking for a similar ring. But then a few days later, he showed up again while I was at work to talk to Amber again. It escalated into a huge fight. Amber called me sobbing. I phoned Jake and told him to leave my house immediately and stay away from his sister. He yelled that he had as much right to the ring as she does because my wife was also his mother. I reminded him he already received a substantial inheritance. Money, the car, and the jewelry was specifically left to Amber. End of story. He hung up. Amber later texted that he stormed out furious. But then, before I could even get home from work that day, Amber called again, yelling that Jake had come back, gone into my room, taken something, and left without saying a word. When she tried to stop him, he shoved her aside. I rushed home and checked the jewelry box. The ring was gone. I called Jake repeatedly, no answer. I finally texted him and said I would contact the police if he didn't bring the ring back immediately. And even if he'd already proposed, it didn't matter. The ring wasn't his to give. That finally got his attention. He called me crying, saying I couldn't do that because he was my son. I said, "Watch me." He stole the ring, he assaulted his sister, he crossed a line I could not and would not ignore. He called back shortly after and confessed he had already taken Sarah to a restaurant and proposed. The ring had been in his possession for less than an hour, and she was already wearing it. I told him that wasn't my problem. He stole it, and he needed to return it. Whether that ruined his proposal wasn't my concern. I said I would get the ring back one way or another, even if it required a police report and a lawyer. He sobbed, begging me not to destroy his life. I told him he destroyed his own life when he stole from his sister and from his dead mother. The ring needed to be back in our hands by morning, or I would start legal proceedings. The next morning, he actually showed up with his girlfriend. They tried to guilt-trip me. Turns out she knew the ring was stolen and still wanted to keep it because she fell in love with it instantly. I told her she could get a jeweler to make a replica if she wanted it that badly, but the original wasn't hers and never would be. Jake begged again, but Amber and I stood firm. Return the ring, or we're going to the police. Sarah ripped the ring off her finger and threw it at Amber, calling me a vicious bastard before running out of the house in tears. Jake yelled that I probably ruined his relationship. I told him he ruined it himself the moment he decided stealing from his family was acceptable. What kind of son steals from his sister and his dead mother? It's sick. He had nothing left to say and stormed out after her. I haven't involved anyone in this mess, but Jake has. He tried to rally friends and relatives to his side, and instead got the opposite. Everyone tore into him for what he did. I've received messages and calls from people supporting me and Amber. A week has passed and Jake still refuses to speak to me. I sent him detailed photos of the ring in case he wants to have a replica made.
But making an identical copy turned out to be extremely expensive unless they used imitation stones. Jake still hasn't replied to my last message. I have no idea what's happening between him and his girlfriend now, or whether they're still together after everything that happened. But even now, I'm certain he had no right to keep that ring. After this whole disaster, I moved all of my late wife's jewelry to a secure safety deposit box that only I can access. It will stay there until Amber turns 21, maybe even longer, depending on what she wants. I won't risk anything like this happening again. I know I made the right decision by getting the ring back, but that doesn't mean it's easy. I don't want my son to resent me forever, and I don't want our family to turn on him. If anyone has advice on how to fix this situation without returning the ring or spending a fortune on a replica, I'm open to hearing it. Update 1. Well, Sarah officially broke up with Jake. He's devastated and blames me for everything. Some people have already pointed out that I might have overrated my son by calling him a good kid. Maybe he used to be. The person he's become lately is a stranger to me. Whether he always had these traits or whether he just fell under the influence of the wrong woman, I honestly don't know. But it doesn't excuse what he did. After I forced them to return the ring, Sarah supposedly spent several days crying in bed. Then she told Jake she didn't want any other ring. She wanted my wife's ring and couldn't imagine an engagement without it now that she'd worn it, even for just a few hours. Jake tried to get sympathy from everyone, friends, relatives, even Sarah's family, and it completely backfired. Word spread fast, and local drama lovers clung to the story like sharks smelling blood. I didn't even ask for updates, but people kept messaging me anyway, so I knew everything that was going on, even though neither Jake nor Sarah would talk to me. Jake still had the photos of the ring I sent him in case he wanted a duplicate made. He took them to a jeweler. The jeweler said he could try to create a replica from images, but he'd need to examine the original to take proper measurements, estimate the materials, and see the stones up close. Jake hesitated for a while. Then, swallowing his pride, he called again. Sarah was now willing to consider a replica, but only if it was perfect down to the smallest detail. A few days after my first post, they asked me to bring the ring to the jeweler so he could give an exact price estimate. I agreed and took a long lunch break to meet them. I retrieved the ring from the safety deposit box and kept it in my sight the entire time. When Sarah saw it again, her eyes lit up with pure greed. She reached her hand out, asking to just hold it for a minute. I told her no, I wasn't going to risk her running off with it. The jeweler examined it carefully. He said the ring was far more valuable than we had assumed. It was handcrafted by my wife's grandfather in the 1940s, with a large diamond in the center and light blue sapphires on the sides. The band was thick 18-karat gold, and the stones were set in platinum. There were delicate floral engravings all around the ring. Just the gemstones for a replica would cost more than Jake had in savings. The labor alone, entirely by hand, would be extremely expensive. The final price was 5 times more than Jake had ever saved in his life. At best, he could put down a deposit and spend years paying the debt off. Jake was willing to consider cheaper alternatives, including using imitation stones or modern materials. The jeweler even showed us 3 modern rings with similar designs at a reasonable price. But suddenly, Sarah slapped Jake across the face, called him a pathetic broke loser, then turned to me and called me a spiteful bastard again for stealing her ring. She insisted the original belonged to her because Jake used it to propose. She even held out her hand, expecting someone to slide it onto her finger again, and demanded I give it back, claiming Amber didn't really need it. She said, "Your wife's family ring is not going to serve her anyway. She's not even going to propose to anyone. Someone can just buy her another ring someday." That was the moment I lost my temper. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her the truth. My wife's family ring will never be hers. Jake had no right to give it to her, which is why he stole it behind my back. Neither of them ever had any claim to it. I told her that people like her, who think they're entitled to anything they want, are exactly what's wrong with the world. She raised her hand as if to hit me too, but the look on my face must have stopped her. She spun around, screamed something intelligible loud enough to make my ears ring, and stormed out, knocking over a display case on purpose on her way out. Jake stared at me with pure rage, but didn't say a word until I asked why he was even dating someone like her. All he said was that he loved her, then went after her. A few days later, Sarah ended things for good, telling Jake he didn't appreciate her since he couldn't get her the ring she deserved.
She also said she couldn't imagine having a father-in-law like me.
She felt utterly humiliated because of me and cried, convinced that everyone now saw her as a gold digger. Honestly, I don't think people were that far off. She slapped my son just because he suggested a cheaper replica of a ring he couldn't afford, and then threw a full-blown tantrum when I wouldn't hand over the original ring the moment she demanded it. That is gold digger behavior. Maybe it's just my opinion, but I doubt Sarah would have stayed with my son if someone wealthier appeared on the horizon. It really seemed like all she wanted was that ring, nothing more. Right after the breakup, Jake tried to get into my house again while I was gone. I have no idea why, but thinking back, maybe he was after the emergency cash in the safe, or thought our family jewelry was still there. I hadn't told him yet that I moved everything to a bank vault. I hated even considering that my own son might break into my home, but he had stolen from us once before, so it wasn't impossible. Someone here advised me to change the locks. I did. Jake's key doesn't work anymore. I'm even thinking of installing security cameras now. Amber called me terrified when Jake showed up. He was pounding on the door, demanding she let him in. I tried calling him, no response. That must have scared him off, because according to Amber, he walked away right after his phone rang. He has a special ringtone set for my number, so he definitely knew it was me. He called me back later that evening. I didn't let him start yelling. I immediately demanded to know why he was trying to break into the house when I wasn't home. He had frightened his sister. She almost called the police. Jake dodged the question and instead began yelling about how I didn't trust him because I changed the locks. I told him, of course I don't trust you after what you did. He shouted that I should just be happy for him and that if his mother were still alive, she'd want him to propose with that ring. That set me off. I told him if she truly wanted that, she would have left the ring to him in her will. Then he started whining that everything was my fault. He repeated all the garbage Sarah had told him, how she called me stingy, how I supposedly didn't think she was good enough for him. I told him he was putting words in my mouth. I barely even knew Sarah and never interfered with their relationship, at least not until he stole the ring. When he tried to argue, I asked him, name one time I ever said something bad about Sarah before the ring incident. He went silent. He couldn't recall anything, because I had hardly seen her at all during their entire relationship. I didn't even know they were dating until they'd been together for 3 months. But that wasn't the point anymore. I asked again why he tried getting into the house. He refused to answer, so I listed the possibilities myself. If he came for the ring or any other heirlooms, too late. Everything is secured elsewhere. If he wanted access to the emergency cash, he'd never get into the safe. And if he came to hurt his sister, I'd deal with him myself. Judging by his silence, I hit at least one nerve. Eventually, he said he was quitting his job, selling his apartment, and moving far away so he'd never have to speak to me again. His final words were, "Enjoy your perfect little daughter." I don't understand how my son changed so drastically in just 1 year. I never called Sarah a manipulative gold digger, only said she had wrapped him around her finger and loved shiny things. Not much difference, I know, but now it's painfully obvious she is manipulative, especially after the dramatic performance she put on trying to keep a ring that never belonged to her. She cried for days over a ring she knew was stolen. Then she exploded when she couldn't keep it or even get a replica. Because of her, my son cut me and his sister out of his life. It hurts. And I'm furious that he chose this path just to please a woman he'd only been dating for 8 months. That's not long enough to talk about marriage. I dated my wife for over 2 years before proposing. And honestly, I can't imagine how disastrous it would have been if Sarah had actually married my son. I know Jake will blame me for a long time. I don't know if we'll ever speak again. I hope we do someday. But right now, we both need distance. Amber is struggling too. She's grateful I got her ring back, but just as shocked as I am at what Jake has become. She calls him a jerk for shoving her aside while stealing the ring. Thankfully, she has plenty of support from me and the rest of the family. Jake has no support left. Relatives have been calling or messaging him to express their outrage. Even his former best friend stopped by to apologize to me. He and Jake had a huge fight over this whole mess, and when that friend refused to take his side, Jake cut him off too. Sarah, Jake's ex, also ran into trouble at home. Her parents contacted me to hear my version and later apologized for her behavior. They only knew part of the story and were horrified to learn the rest. They had always thought she was kind, but said she had changed a lot in recent years and they were disappointed in her. They previously helped her pay half the rent, but said they won't renew her lease once it expires. She can either pay it on her own or find a new place. Now she blames and curses me too. I don't know what's wrong with people these days. When I was Jake's age, people like this were rare. Now they're everywhere, spreading toxicity like a flood. All I can hope is that one day my son wakes up and finds his way back to being the good man he used to be. Whether he ever speaks to me or not, I'll still wish him happiness. Update 2. And please, stop asking me for photos of the ring. A lot of people have messaged me wanting to see it or order a similar one. I told my daughter about these posts, and she's proud of me, but she does not want the ring online. It's hers. I don't need a reason. Her choice is final, and I will respect it.
I'm not thrilled about the idea of posting photos either. If strangers start copying the ring, it'll lose what makes it special. I was fine with my son making a replica that would have stayed within the family, but there's no way I'm putting it online for everyone to duplicate. I deleted the pictures I had sent Jake a long time ago. The ring is stored in a bank vault now. It won't stay there forever. When I can afford it, I plan to buy a proper home safe. Over the weeks since my first post, I installed security cameras around the house, and thank God I did. For everyone asking whether my son got back together with Sarah, no, they're not together. Jake really is selling his apartment and hasn't spoken to me since that last phone call, the one where he wished me a nice life with my precious daughter because he didn't get what he wanted from me. I met with my lawyer and updated my will. I didn't cut him out entirely, but he lost a large portion of what he would have inherited. After everything that's happened, I can't bring myself to feel sorry for him anymore. My daughter Amber called him a simp, and once I looked up what that meant, I realized how accurate it is. But I don't want to stay angry or sad. Neither emotion does me any good. I'm trying to let go and move forward. Jake clearly chose a life without us. Maybe one day he'll realize how wrong he was, but I can't force him to rethink his choices. I ran into Sarah by accident recently. She spotted me at the mall while I was out with a friend. She started yelling across the crowd, calling me a stingy old miser. I didn't have to defend myself. My friend laughed and called her out as a thief and a greedy woman who only wanted my late wife's ring because she couldn't afford anything like it herself. People around us immediately turned to stare. Sarah flipped us off and stormed away, knocking things over, even a small child who started crying. When she realized she had hurt the kid, she sprinted off like she was escaping a crime scene. Later that day, she showed up at my doorstep, screaming that it was my fault her friends now call her a gold digger and won't speak to her. I told her plainly she is a gold digger. She had no right to that ring in the first place, and the way she cried for days over something she knew had been stolen, then dumped my son because he couldn't buy her what she wanted, is classic gold digger behavior. I told her I'd make sure she never sees that ring again. She kept screaming nonsense all the way back to her car. I hoped she'd finally leave us alone, but she didn't. For those who thought drugs were behind her and Jake's behavior, sorry to disappoint, but no. The police reports confirmed she was clean. Whatever's going on with her, it's all her own doing, and apparently Jake's too. Last week, Sarah was arrested for trying to break into my house. The cameras recorded her sneaking into my backyard and trying to hack down my back door with an axe. The alarm went off and she ran, but the front cameras captured her face and her car perfectly.
She even dropped the axe with her fingerprints on it. By the time police arrived, she was gone, but they found her later at home. They were only going to arrest her for trespassing and attempted break-in, but she started fighting, so they had to take her down and drag her out. She clearly needs mental help. I spoke with her parents afterward. They offered to pay for the damaged door and told me what they knew. No drugs in her system. Serious mental health issues, yes. They told me they planned to move her out of town once the legal mess is handled. I don't know what happened after that, but honestly, it's not my place to pry. I do feel a little sorry for her. She seems genuinely unwell. I assumed Jake already knew since everyone else was talking about it, but he's completely cut off contact. Not just with me, but with his friends and extended family too. One of his coworkers finally reached out and said Jake is still furious about everything. He insists the ring would have been a small price to pay for his happiness. Now that Sarah is gone, he's switched to blaming her instead, calling her a crazy gold digger who ruined his life. It seems he only knows how to point the finger at others. Until he learns to take responsibility for his own actions, I don't see how we can repair our relationship. He's not going to get anywhere in life if he keeps deflecting blame. I hope some time alone helps him cool down and reflect on the mess he created. Update 3. Most people online have been supportive, but every now and then some random stranger messages me calling me a bad father or a Python psycho. Honestly, these people need a hobby. If their goal is to break me down, it's not working. Though it is annoying, not a single one of them offered a better solution or advice on how I should have handled any of this. They just want to yell at someone. One of them even lost their account, not because of me, but because they were just trolling everywhere. Most recently, someone messaged me from an account created the day before. Maybe it was the same guy. Do these people really have nothing better to do? If anyone has criticism, fine, but at least offer real suggestions instead of calling me a terrible father or a monster. People who only want to argue and insult do nothing to improve the situation. End of update.
They do all of this just to feed their own egos. And honestly, you can tell something's wrong with these people if their only source of entertainment is harassing a widower who's simply trying to hold his family together. Real mature, right? And for those trolls insisting I should have acted differently, let's go over the facts. First, my son showed my late wife's heirloom ring to his gold-digging girlfriend without my permission. Second, I gave him a fair chance to ask his sister for the ring properly, since he wanted it to propose. She refused, and that should have been the end of it. Third, he stole the ring, attacked his own sister, and within an hour slipped it onto his girlfriend's finger like nothing happened. Fourth, I was dragged through the mud for demanding the return of a stolen heirloom that belonged to my late wife and was legally willed to my daughter. Fifth, I even tried to help them get a replica made, but his girlfriend threw a tantrum because she didn't get the original, and my son couldn't afford a proper copy. Sixth, after she dumped him, my son tried to break into my house, likely to steal something else. Seventh, his ex tried to publicly humiliate me and then knocked over a child during one of her outbursts. Eighth, the same ex-girlfriend tried to break down my back door with an axe and was arrested. Ninth, and now my son blames literally everyone except himself, while the only people supporting him are trolls online. If after all of that, I'm still being painted as the villain, then the people writing these messages seriously need their heads checked. Yes, I changed the locks. That's a normal reaction when someone breaks into your home, even if that someone is your own son. No, I wasn't trying to escalate anything. Jake and Sarah escalated it on their own. I wanted to talk things out calmly, but all they did was demand what they felt entitled to, and I wasn't going to pay for their replica either. When my wife passed away, my son inherited over $50,000 and his mother's car. My daughter inherited the family jewelry. That seems perfectly fair to me. My son used all the money as a down payment on a nice apartment. And for the record, I paid for his college, and I'll pay the same for my daughter when her time comes.
I don't have a favorite child, but sometimes people behave horribly, and you just can't fix that for them. Someone told me my son probably packed up and left because his pride won't let him admit he's wrong. He wants a fresh start somewhere no one knows him. I can understand that on some level, but it doesn't change the fact that he dug this hole himself. Now I have a son who hates me for the consequences of his own actions. Relatives and friends message me constantly about him, even though I never asked. Meanwhile, my daughter is terrified he'll come back and hurt her. I'm already arranging therapy for her as soon as possible. I installed a full home security system with cameras. That decision already paid off. His ex-girlfriend tried to break down my back door. I tried to help my son become a better person without enabling him, but he rejected every attempt and shoved my hand away, figuratively and literally. So tell me, trolls, how does any of this make me a monster? Final update. My son just left town. I hoped the drama would finally end, but it didn't. Yes, Jake sold his apartment, no idea for how much, but he probably made a decent profit. Last Saturday, he loaded everything he could into his car and drove off. Rumors never died down, so the whole town knows what he did. At one point, Jake almost got into a fight at a bar after someone confronted him publicly. I tried to visit him one last time, to talk, maybe reconcile before he moved away. By then I'd realized leaving town was probably the best thing he could do. His reputation here was completely destroyed. But when I knocked, he refused to open the door. I told him I just wanted to talk, but he yelled through the door that I ruined his life and there was nothing to discuss. Then he went quiet, only to suddenly bring up the ring again, saying I should have just let Sarah keep it or helped pay for the replica. Then he said it didn't matter anymore because Sarah turned out to be unstable and they broke up for good, and he didn't want anything to do with me or his sister ever again. That made me snap. I told him his behavior was unacceptable. He attacked his own sister and stole from his own family. He was lucky I never called the police. Everyone who knew what he did took my daughter's side. When the entire town thinks you're wrong, that's a pretty massive red flag. I told him to stop this performance fueled by his pride. Whether it was grief for his mother, or the fact that he's now the same age I was when he was born, or something else, I didn't know. But he knew he was wrong and refused to admit it, and I was done covering for him. He never spread rumors about the ring. He and Sarah did that. I'm tired of being blamed for the mess he created himself. Only narcissists and cowards behave like that. His mother and I raised him better, and he knows she would never have approved of this, but she's not here to tell him. If you steal something that isn't yours, you don't get to blame the owner for wanting it back. He went silent for a few seconds, then yelled, "Screw you, Dad." I heard him crying and breaking things inside. A neighbor at the end of the hallway peeked out and quickly hid again, so that little scene will definitely spread as gossip too. He refused to say anything else, so I left. But as I was exiting the building, a police car pulled up. 2 officers stepped out and asked for my name. When I told them, they said someone reported that I was trying to break into an apartment. I explained that I'd been arguing with my son through the door and never tried to force my way in. I only knocked. I told them the entire story, mentioned the neighbor who saw and heard everything, and reminded them the building had security cameras. One officer went upstairs to talk to the neighbor. The other put me in handcuffs.
He was very polite and explained that the handcuffs were just a precaution, since they still didn't know who was telling the truth. I told him I understood he was just doing his job, and he let me sit on a nearby bench. After about 10 or 15 minutes, hard to tell since I couldn't check my watch, the officer who went inside radioed back that the neighbor's story mostly matched mine. Several other neighbors also confirmed hearing our conversation through the door. Then he said he would check the security footage, which took even longer. Since I still couldn't see the time, all I could do was sit and wait. The kind officer turned on the radio on his phone so I wouldn't be completely bored. Eventually, the second officer radioed again and told his partner to take off the handcuffs because the cameras backed me up. The audio wasn't great, but it was clear enough to show that I never tried to break into the apartment. Once I was uncuffed, the two officers talked quietly for a moment. Then they asked if I really was the father whose son had stolen the ring that belonged to his late mother. I admitted it and asked how they knew. They said the story had already been going around the station, and once they heard my version, everything clicked. One officer said he had been on duty the day Sarah was arrested and described how she acted like a wild animal, trying to bite people and screaming threats like, "Do you know who my parents are? I'll have you all ruined." His wording was much harsher than that. I could only stare at the ground in embarrassment. The officers told me to go home and suggested I avoid coming back. I nodded and left. As I walked away, I noticed them going back into the building, probably to talk to Jake. I'm certain he was the one who called the police because later some of his neighbors messaged me online saying the officers had chewed him out for a false report so badly that he nearly cried. They also reminded him about the ring incident and said his behavior was pathetic. Judging by the timeline, Jake must have exaggerated heavily because the police showed up almost immediately after we started talking through the door. He's lucky he didn't get arrested for wasting their time. When I got home, my daughter Amber comforted me. She said I did everything I could and that it wasn't my fault Jake turned into a jerk. Still, it hurt. Maybe I've lost my son forever. I took the next day off work, shut myself in my office, played Dragon Warrior on my NES emulator, and ate vanilla ice cream just to calm down. Jake left town over the weekend. Maybe I'll never see him again. But if I do, I hope he realizes I've always cared about him. Yes, he treated me horribly, but I'm still his father. If he knocked on my door tomorrow wanting to talk, I'd let him in. I just hope it won't take 10 or 12 years for that day to come. Some people asked how big our town is if rumors spread so fast. It's not tiny, more like slightly below average in size. The reason gossip traveled so quickly was my wife's enormous and tight-knit family. They're everywhere in this town, no exaggeration. I could bump into one of them just going for a walk or buying groceries, and many of them loved to gossip. When Jake started looking for support from relatives online, that lit the fuse. First, they told him exactly what they thought of his behavior, and then they repeated the story to everyone they knew. The situation spun out of control before I even realized what was happening. Jake got his 15 minutes of shame, and it should have ended there. But his ex, Sarah, made everything worse by telling the story to absolutely everyone trying to get sympathy. That doubled the drama, and soon both of them had lost all their friends. People I had never met started messaging me, even though I never shared my contact information anywhere. No idea how they found me, but at this point it doesn't matter. Now that Jake has left town, things are finally calming down. Within the first week or two, I managed to convince most relatives to delete their posts about Jake, but the damage was already done. I begged people to stop spreading the story. I didn't want attention. I just wanted life to go back to normal. But everything Jake and Sarah did only made the mess bigger. Some also asked about the guy who recognized Jake in the bar and confronted him. From what I heard, he was a neighbor of one of Jake's ex-friends, so it's no surprise he knew what Jake looked like. And yes, even at my age, I still love old video games. It's my little way to relax. My kids never cared for them, and my wife didn't like them either, so it's always been my personal hobby. I don't play often. Maybe once or twice a year, I speed run Dragon Warrior using cheats, because I've never been a great gamer and probably never will be.